Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
Locked and loaded, ladies and gentlemen, once again for another one for the archives, another episode of the Conspiracy Farm. Jeffrey Wilson coming to you live and direct from the gateway to the West St. Louis, Missouri, riding shotgun, as always, with my co-host, partner in crime, eater of worlds, governor of lightning and thunder, master of the cha-cha, Patrick J. Miletich. What's up, brother?
I'm doing good, man. I am doing good, and my head is spinning from everything that's been going on. I tell you what, man, it just seems to get more and more bizarre every week. And we've been talking about this since we started doing this show over 3 years ago, saying, can it get any weirder? And it does. It literally does.
And one of my recent posts, man, on the old Facebookings, you know, every day it just seems to confirm for me that we are like literally in the matrix, a false reality placed over this thing we call reality. And we're going to chop it up today, man, with one of my favorite guests, one of our top viewed guests, listen guests, however you want to say it. The guy's a big brain, man, and there's several things we want to talk about. He was recently over here in the States because he lives over there in Tokyo, Japan with his wife and beautiful children. Wow, he is the host of the ANC Report, the Anti NeoCon Report, good friend of the show, returning guest Ryan Dawson. What's up, brother?
Returning champion, yeah. Pat Miletich, martial artist and cha-cha champion. He's got that in common with Bruce Lee.
You know,
Bruce Lee did the cha-cha.
It seems like every episode, the list of accolades just continue to extend for this man. But
listen, my greatest accolade, Ryan, and I get attacked on Twitter constantly, no matter what it is. Constantly, I'm attacked by the left, and it's their go-to. Is that I suffer from CTE and I'm a moron. So that's no matter what I say, I suffer from CTE and I'm a moron.
It's the default mode of the libtards.
It's their default every
Before
time.
we do get started, ladies and gentlemen, we have to. It is absolutely imperative that we thank our parent sponsor, our lead sponsor, Chemical Free Body, chemicalfreebody.com. Man, I tell you what, champion, you're going to echo this stuff. And Ryan, I don't know if you've checked it out either, man, but you know, we all think like serotonin's the place where, or the brain is where serotonin's all it's produced and stuff, but learning about the gut, man, gut health, there's more serotonin produced in the gut than in the brain, and how essential gut health is to overall health. So I just go check it out, ladies and gentlemen. chemicalfreebody.com. If you throw in the promo code farmer, you get a little bit of discount off that. But the products themselves,
farmer.
Absolutely, go check it out.
That's
and
right.
It's just dope stuff.
Serotonin cycles through the brain and the bloodstream. That's why you have when they talk about SSRIs as reuptake inhibitors.
Yes.
So that means uptake from where, right? Below. So it's absolutely true.
Good stuff, man.
And if Pat Miletich had CTE, then he'd be a genius, not a moron. Because if he's able to say and think the way he does, even with CTE, he's definitely not a moron. That would make him a genius.
Well,
Yeah.
I just say, imagine what I was like before I got hit in the head, Ryan.
I would like to think it was just because you've been hanging out with me the last 4 or 5 years, champ. But you know,
Oh, it's helped. It has helped. Brainiac freak.
Ryan, what's up, my man? What have you been up to, brother? You got a lot on your plate, man. You just came over here to the States. You do live over in Japón, over there in Japan. You came over here and have even teased a little bit about running for office and whatnot. How was your trip over here to the States, brethren?
I was because my my congressman passed away, unfortunately, and he was one of the rare good ones, Walter Jones, anti-war all the way. And but that didn't happen because simultaneously, right after he died, I got removed from YouTube, Facebook, and all my. As soon as I
Vimeo
said,
too, man.
Congress. Oh yeah, well that happened beforehand, but yeah, I lost all my Vimeo videos, all the videos I was selling. They stole $5,000 of sales that I'd already made. That takes a long time to make $5,000 on social media, Shelly. You guys should know. So
Right.
that was that was my Christmas money, and everything I'd planned to do was taken away, and then that meant I had to find some other place to host and sell my films. So they ate up another couple months really of revenue. And so yeah, but as far as running for office went, I had to get about 3,000 signatures out of Dare County and Hides, and I had no way of reaching anybody, and it wasn't worth the gamble of going all the way down to North Carolina I could have done it easily with my YouTube. I would have gotten those signatures in 2 days. But
I would have been more than happy to campaign for you, bro. Seriously.
Plenty of people would have. And I know there's issues inside and out about beach erosion, beach nourishment, and things that are important to my area of the world. And I've actually been lobbying and had a relationship with Walter Jones, the man who passed away anyway. So I know all his legislative assistants, and I was used to that. I'm used to D.C., and I could have represented North Carolina well. And can you imagine someone like me on the congressional floor grilling Elliot Abrams? And it would have been epic. But...
Oh, I'd love it.
Oh my good. That's when I saw you wrote that and posted that, I'm like, oh my God. Like,
people were like, dude, it's possible, because we still have till July. I guess I could throw my hat in the ring, but now it's I need to get in early. The only disadvantage I have, it would be financing. But
I thought you were doing your own brand of hope porn, dude. And I was like, are you kidding me right now, dude? Because that could
it's hard to get in because incumbents enjoy, what is it, like 95, 98% return. Like almost always the incumbent wins. But since the incumbent passed away, which is exactly how Ron Paul got elected, the congressman before him died while he was in office, so they had just a regular election. And so this is how you get good people in
North Carolina. That's one of those man, who was that? Jesse Helms ran that joint for so long, wasn't it? Jesse Helms.
Jesse Helms was a senator.
Helms was a leader of the civil rights, right?
He wanted to cover up nude statues. He was very, very conservative. But
wow probably
Faircloth too, to be fair though, and he was the one that introduced workfare, which is similar to what Japan and a lot of other states have. It's a temporary welfare, but you don't get to keep your leisure time. You have to do kind of like state-provided BS jobs, just so that you have incentive to get back to work. So like you'll get paid, you'll get your welfare, but you don't get to sit at home and watch Netflix. You have to go do things.
And keep pumping out freaking humans.
Turn in a certain number of job applications, things like that.
No, you actually, like the way Japan does it, like you'll have to go to a train station and pass out like little like square toilet paper all day with ads on it, and you do it all day long. So they'll give you a job. It's not a necessary job. It's just one to eat up your time. But it's like saying, hey, you got to do something
to make you really desire a real job.
Yeah.
Right, because otherwise, if you get paid the same amount as an entry-level job, why should you work? You get all your leisure time and you still get the money. So they figured out, okay, well, make sure you get paid more than what you're actually worth, what you're doing, but you don't get to keep your leisure time. So, and it's it's like packing ice cream. It's doing stuff, one guy digging a hole, another guy filling it in. It doesn't matter. They just give you busy work. So that, because they figured out, it gives you an incentive and a little bit of life skill too, so that you'll get a real job.
Well, like you said, it's not over yet. There's still possibility of a Ryan Dawson run. If
people really want to see that. The other thing is I have to find a religion, because technically there's 9 states where it's illegal to be an atheist and run for office. And so,
and North Carolina's one of them. Apparently.
North Carolina's one of them. Yeah.
Ouch. Well, before we proceed, man, and we got a lot to talk about, I found it interesting today, and I know we could honestly probably do a full-on episode on this, but this is the anniversary of the death, and not the assassination, because it happened the day before, the death of President Abraham Lincoln after being assassinated in Ford's Theater by John Wilkes Booth so many years ago. What are your thoughts on that, man? I more specifically, because like I said, we could go off on a huge tangent on that. The guy who killed him, John Wilkes Booth, there's been so much...
Who was apparently related to one of the plotters that killed Caesar.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And had been in a play. I think he played Brutus. He was at that theater, that same theater. He had played... He was one of the characters. There's a lot of guys stabbed Julius Caesar, but in that play he had killed Caesar, and then in that theater later, as an adult, shot Lincoln, the tyrant, in the back of the head.
Brutus or Cassius, possibly, like you said. A lot of people got some.
I think it was Brutus, and he claimed he was playing him because apparently they were related, over many generations.
Interesting. So very quickly, kind of
that's bizarre.
Kingslayers, the Targaryens.
You ever seen that Lincoln Kennedy comparison?
Of course.
That's a bizarre stuff, and so there's a lot of weirdo stuff like that.
Has anybody ever fact checked that though? Because it's so it's so amazing that I found it to be
Unbelievable.
literally unbelievable.
I mean, yeah, I know off the top of my head a good chunk of that list was true. Like they was driving, and the Secretary of States and stuff did have the names reversed and all that. So, yeah, it's pretty weird. And it was Ford's Theater too, and so it was like, but the thing is, like, you know, when you have people who are so famous and their profile so broad and so many facts are known about them, yeah, I have a much higher chance of something matching up. But there's some weird things like with different prominent scientists passing away, and then another one is on their day they died, another one was born, and things like that. But that's
very fascinating. Someone needs to do a
Jefferson died on the 4th of July, right? Not only did
Ah.
Jefferson die on the 4th of July, the very first English-speaking colony to the New World landed on the 4th of July in the 1580s for the Sir Walter Raleigh's colony.
That Roanoke?
And it was Roanoke. They call it the Roanoke colony. They shouldn't, because they landed in Hatteras. But
when does something like facts matter?
John Quinn got commissioned by the Roanoke Tourist Commission to write a book about the lost colony, the alleged lost colony. And, they call it the Roanoke colony, but what he did is the cover of his book, he has Roanoke in the center, and he has the very northern tip of Hatteras, and the map he's using is John White's map, which clearly depicted Croatoan/Hatteras, where they had been on 2 prior voyages before ever going to Roanoke. So it was his nod, his little like coy way of saying, yes, I've seen these map and primary sources, and yes, I know the colony wasn't lost and they went to Croatoan, but I'm being commissioned by Roanoke, and this is what I'm writing. But through the cover of his book, anybody that had looked at the primary sources knows that's John White's map and that everything's clearly labeled on it. So, wow. My brother's done a lot of work debunking the history's mysteries down there. And it makes you wonder, because if you can lie about the birth of the United States, what can you not lie about?
Well, I mean, come on. I mean, like we hopefully are going to have on Graham Hancock in April, and we had on Randall Carlson not too long ago. But Graham Hancock's new book is America Before, and just so much of that ancient history that has just been so skewed and just hidden.
It is, and I want this podcast to do a live video shoot as soon as we find one of the giant skeletons and dig it up.
Go up there and I mean, it's.
Is that a curveball you were?
Did you know Andre the Giant's house he sold it to a basketball player, but there are a series of houses in that neighborhood that are all giant size, like everything's upscaled for big people. It's pretty cool. It's in North Carolina.
Remember hearing about as a wrestler, he couldn't use the bathroom, so he would go, and when he would stay in hotels, he'd take dumps in the bathroom, and
he would just go in the shower.
Yeah.
Just let it go. Can I tell you a quick Andre story?
Absolutely. Ryan is also a huge professional
Hogan,
wrestling fan, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm big into Giants, and I'm big into pro wrestling.
For sure.
And I met Hulk Hogan in Clearwater. It was random. Like his store or his restaurant or whatever was being like redone. So I was like, man, it sucks. I'll just go into the store and take some pictures. And there he was. It was just like a random Tuesday. And we told some Andre stories and stuff. So there's an interesting story about
Andre stories.
We did. Me and Hogan, buddy of mine.
Terry. Me and Terry hanging out.
Forgotten about it. He used to live in Japan for a couple of years. He lived in Tokyo.
No, he was super big, yeah. That was part of how him and Vern Gagne fell out, because he was making so much money in Japan. Vern wanted a chunk of his money. That's part of why he left for Vince. But
they broke his leg over here. But that was back there, very protective of the territories. And at that time, like, Japanese have known jiu-jitsu since they invented it, and it was kept very secret. Now, it's everywhere. But the way a lot of pro wrestling was still trying to act like it was real, up until
kayfabe, baby.
So, yep. And but they did have some real hookers and shooters that knew jiu-jitsu, that knew wrestling, and could protect their range should someone not want to drop the belt and da-da-da-da. And Inoki was one of those guys. But Hogan's trainers did put him in a toe hold and broke his shin. And if you go in blind, you don't know it's like they'd never seen it before.
Right.
You're not penetrating Japan, even if they are a bit smaller. They're gonna annihilate you, But anyway, Andre was in Japan, and you were talking about the bathroom story, so that was a little funny. But Hogan was like his neighbor in the hotel, and he just heard us like Andre laugh, and these 2 Japanese girls go screaming, leaving his room, like screaming out of his room. He's like, "What did he do?" So he thought he's big everywhere, but Hogan comes in the room and Andre's just laughing, and he had like laid newspaper out all over the bed and just taking a big giant sized dump on top of the bed, because he usually would go in the shower, but some hotels, like even now, like even I, like the shower hits me in the chest. I can't imagine being someone with acromegaly, and like he couldn't get in the bathroom. The door was too small.
Yeah,
So he just
tiny there.
it's even now, right? And so this was decades ago, and Andre just grabbed some newspapers, set them out on the bed, and just went. And apparently did it in front of these. He did it whenever, and then these girls came in, maids or whatever, and saw that and just ran out screaming. And he was
it's probably the size of a Clydesdale turd.
Like a big horse.
Baby's
I don't know
arm.
if he was like transporting it to the toilet a sheet at a time or whatever, but he was laughing his giant ass off, and Hogan had to witness the turd as well. And of course, it's disgusting, but it's also a bit of showmanship, because this is a weird thing. He's like had to go get the other wrestlers and be like, "Come look at this. It's disgusting. You definitely want to see it, brother."
From
the Budweiser Clydesdale song playing.
Right.
Yeah.
From asking about comments on the anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's assassination, we end up with Andre the Giant's turds. But
taking giant shit on a bed in Japan.
Was John
He put the tape down. He didn't just like do it because he was drunk or something.
No.
He like thought it out and couldn't think of a better plan, I guess.
And he's just on to the next town, on to the next hotel. It's like one of a trillion.
Out a pencil. He had to take a pencil and dial the phone like that, because it hit 2 buttons at a time and stuff. And he couldn't do it. So
Can't even imagine. But to round it out to where we started, was John Wilkes Booth an agent working for the British? I know that's complete, not natural segue, but
the original conspiracy was to kidnap Lincoln, and it was a conspiracy, and Boots was part of that ring of guys from the Sons of Liberty, but no, not for the British. Definitely not.
How do you feel about Albert Pike's connection to the assassination? Because of Pike's basically, many believe he was the one that was obviously connected to the globalists. The central bank secured a lot of the funding for the South side of the war and all that.
Yeah, a lot of the central banks didn't like either side. They wanted the Americans to tear each other apart. And although Lincoln made greenbacks, he was very much in league with the financial powers of Boston and Philly and New York. So he was on that side. The South threatened to overturn all of that. They wanted more independence. And they printed their own money too, the Confederate dollar. So they didn't like the Americans getting, thinking about, wow, your own treasury is going to print your own money. They didn't like that at all. But Lincoln was the original fascist. I mean, he was a railroad lawyer. He did the marriage of big business and state. Not to mention, killing 1 million Americans and then going west,
suspending the writ of habeas corpus and.
Yeah, throwing judges in jail and closing down papers and then enslaving the Chinese. And yeah, he was a real monster, but they have colored him like he's like Gandhi, Jesus hero person. And he was just he's the worst president we've ever had. Just like bar none. He's the worst.
Yeah, I would love to actually do another episode around something basically on the Civil War, because that's another one that's, it's just all about slavery. Of course, slavery was a portion of it.
Now it is, but that was, I mean, come on.
Yeah, but one more. Yeah.
That's like the Iraq War is about liberating Kurds, and Afghanistan is for liberating women. You can point to very real, prejudices towards women in Afghanistan and the Kurds, and yeah, there was slavery, but that's not why they had a war. Not at all. They didn't even mention it for 2 years.
Right.
No. Hit on slavery real quick, and the North's abolishment of slavery and all of that.
Part of the North abolished slavery.
It wasn't out of kindness, of course.
Wage slavery was more cost efficient for the owners, but also 5 northern states had slaves. Then they enslaved the Chinese after the Civil War. The Civil War was an economic war. South Carolina had been trying to secede since the late 1820s, and then, years later over the tariff issue. And Calhoun was the vice president, and he made this compromise to have the tariff on Southern agricultural products, cotton and tobacco, etc., lowered in increments every 2 years, back down to acceptable levels. Lincoln put it back up, to that 50% export tax. So they fired on Fort Sumter, which is where they physically collected the export tax. I mean, that's the beginning of the Civil War. And everyone's writing about this, not slavery. And so when they were trying to secede for the same reason they were trying to secede earlier, and slavery was never even mentioned through the 1830s or anything. In fact, they attacked and annexed part of Mexico, which had freed slaves in 1821. And then so in 1848, there's war with Mexico and part of Mexican territory, which was seceding itself. Northern Mexico was trying to leave southern Mexico. The Tennessee Volunteers in the United States joined with the North Mexicans, Texicans, Comanche Indians, and Apache, and were separated from Mexico. And then many of them, except for Texas, joined the United States, and then Texas would later too. But they were a free state, and it would made a bunch of slave states, including the entire Nevada territory, which is several states now. But that was a slave territory, and same people were involved. That's when Robert E. Lee was just a cavalry engineer, and the same guys he'd be fighting with later, helped take land from Mexico and turn it into a slave-holding territory. And General Grant had slaves. General Robert E. Lee did not have slaves, and Arlington Cemetery was his personal property that is now where, Confederate and Union buried alike. And
it's interesting that there's a lot of blacks that have been in Mexico since the slave days who had escaped into Mexico to flee slavery and have since, obviously, their descendants live there.
Yep. Or imagine fleeing and landing in northern Mexico, and then slavery is reinstituted.
Yeah.
But there wasn't as prominent in Texas. Most of slavery was in agricultural areas. And then they basically had, slavery, not more, I would say serfdom with the Irish and Polish or Catholic immigrants from anywhere really in the north. They had them plucking feathers, and, they would pay people in script and things like that. So it's like, oh, you get paid, but you don't get paid in money. You get paid in script, and you can only spend this special currency at the company store and stuff like that. So it's like you get paid and you have to recycle your earnings back into like,
that's what we're doing here in the United States anyway.
Well, this would last long after the Civil War. When liberals are going on about getting rid of guns and they're supposed to be talking about labor rights and all that, I remind them of the Blair Mountain Rebellion. Over 1 million rounds of ammunition was fired in that. This is in the 1920s, okay? And West Virginia, so former part of a southern state, became a Union border state, did have slaves, by the way. Not in the 20s, but the miners were quasi-slaves because they'd have to rent their equipment. They got paid in script. They had to recycle the script back in the company store. Right. It was horrible conditions, child labor, all that, basically slaves. And they would use these private detective companies. Pinkerton's the most famous one, but there were many of them, and they would use these as like basically hired guns to break up strikes and unions and so on, and force them into the conditions they were in. And a particular sheriff who was the Hatfield-McCoy conflict, which would come later, but he was a Hatfield that shot 5 of these detectives dead for their harassment and abuse on people, and he was a local hero. And they shot him in the back when he appeared at court unarmed and killed him, and that kicked off this rebellion, which lasted for 10 days, and thousands of miners were rebelling. So, and it did result in labor laws being changed. So when liberals whine about that, you remind them about the Blair Mountain Rebellion, as well as the Colorado coal miner strike, where it wasn't people like whining with pussy hats. It was tens of thousands of guys with guns that fired on the federal government and killed FBI. And even they had to bring in the Army and the Air Force. The only time until Waco Waco just used police helicopters. An actual U.S. Air Force was used against the U.S. civilian population and dropping bombs on them. There's a lot of more World War I veterans too, so they knew tactics and they knew what was up, because they always send the poor to war, and then the poor came back and they took the war to the government. Now it's this massive rebellion that a lot of people never heard of.
I'd never heard of that in my life.
Blair Mountain Rebellion. Check that out on Wiki. Gives a kind of kosher version of it or whatever, for lack of a better word. But there's books about it, and there's a song about it even. I think David Rovick made a song about it, and there's local songs about it. But yeah, I mean, it's the biggest labor riot ever. 1 million rounds were fired. They had machine guns shooting at each other in different positions, and county versus county. It's really interesting. It's
I'm surprised that hasn't been a movie, dude. That sounds like a movie, like a champ right there.
It should be. It's in Logan. It was mostly in Logan County, West Virginia. People there know about it, still talk about it. I mean, that would be like my grandmother was born in the 20s. She's 90 years old. Like, that's not that long ago.
Right. In the context of time, for sure.
And, you know, her grandfather was in the Civil War. So, like, fought on both sides.
Well, let's fast forward, man. Like I said, Ryan Dawson's the shit, ladies and gentlemen. We could have chapter after chapter, and of course you're always welcome here, and we'll always be back. But we're gonna
I didn't get asked about Civil War or anything. I thought we were gonna do Assange and so on. But
no, we will. We are, brother. I mean, how long we got you for a minute, don't we?
I'm just saying, like, if I was prepared, I could really dig in.
No, come on, yeah.
What time is it there right now, Ryan?
Oh, it's like 10:35 in the morning. I'm not stressed for time at all. We're good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So fast forward, man. I mean, obviously you're very well abreast of what's going on over here over the last over the last few years. So we've had this, Russian collusion. Trump is working for Putin, et cetera, et cetera. Mueller and
wait a minute.
I think I told you the last time I was on the show about a year
ago. I'm just giving the background of what's been going on.
Yeah. That's what they say has been going on, yeah.
Of course, that's.
I was going to say what Russian collusion?
Let me do my thing. I'm transitioning here. I'm segueing, gang. Come on.
Collusion? No.
We're moving. Yeah, so now Mueller. We can have a conversation on whose side he's on, et cetera, et cetera. But his finding, these many years after everyone's been saying that he's working for Putin, and this happened without a doubt, and all these people who've been indicted is just indicative of that fact. And come to find out, we have found no collusion. There's been no collusion proven. And then, obviously that's rejected by a certain side. But what are your thoughts on that? And not only just that, on just the Mueller investigation, how horseshit that was. I will preface this. We're going to talk a little bit also about Israel tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And let me tell you something. Newsflash. You can talk about Israel without being anti-Semitic. Ryan's not. I'm not. Pat's not. So we're going to have a little bit of conversation about Israel as well, because there is another aspect of Russia collusion that you've alluded to that you kind of call Israelgate, and those conversations with Michael Flynn, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on Mueller's findings and a possible role of Israel in this conversation?
Mueller refused to investigate the Saudis that did a dry run on 9/11. And so he's already whatever. But they were as certain that they would find Russian collusion as they were that Hillary Clinton would win the election. Remember when they were giving her like 97.5% odds of beating Trump? And they live in bubbles and talk to each other. And there's no Russia collusion. Like I said that, many people said that, like when people would bring that up, I'm like, are they really still talking about that? Because there's no evidence, motive, nothing. Like,
we'll go back to also when Russia. It started, when it really started, because we've talked about it on the show. Around May 2016, they found out the DNC things were hacked. Seth Rich was involved, and you have this company called CrowdStrike, which comes in, which then begins to create this narrative of Russian collusion, which is so weirdly gaslighting, because we find out that Tony Podesta, John Podesta, Hillary Clinton, everyone's working with Ukraine and the Russians, etc. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it was as stupid as a cover for. I mean, look, somebody on the inside, possibly Seth Rich, leaked this information. It wasn't hacked, and it definitely wasn't hacked by the Russians. And
we know that
also,
through digital forensics.
Right? Oh, what happened? Somebody told the truth about Hillary Clinton's crimes? Aren't we supposed? Isn't that journalism anyway?
Right.
But, they're not mad at her for doing it. They're mad at somebody for telling on her for it.
Exactly.
Which is amazing.
That's the madness of today, though.
Exactly.
That is the mindset of today with a lot of people.
Yeah, they're on their team. They're very, very tribalistic for that, and they hate Trump because they think he's literally Hitler. And the Russia smear is two birds with one stone. They really hated Russia because they wouldn't go along with the plan in Syria, and basically most of Syria is still sovereign under Syrian rule today because Russia did intervene and actually fought against Al Qaeda, which we're supposed to be doing. In fact, we covertly aided them the whole time. But,
Not even covertly anymore. It's almost like, everybody kind of knows that.
The globalists stopped hiding their agenda. When they thought they were 100% sure that she was going to win, they stopped hiding their agenda altogether the last year at least.
They got sloppy.
They just blatantly threw it in our faces of what they were going to do.
They would say, McCain and the rest of them, they overtly, the State Department would not list al-Sham as a terrorist group until finally these idiots filmed themselves machine gunning women's guts all up against the wall and hanging kids. And then finally, under international pressure, they're labeled as terrorists. They rebrand themselves, and then we just continue to aid them using Turkey as a conduit. But I digress. What I thought about Russiagate, though, was early on, and I remember being in Sydney when I was supposed to talk at university, and I didn't get to because they were going to make me pay for security that I didn't need, which was just a pretext to not let me speak, But I talked at a convention center instead, and a little one. And I remember talking about Michael Flynn then because I was excited. Here's the guy, the head of the DIA, that had the actual reports on Syria, admitting that Hillary, who was the Secretary of State, was saying we need to create a Salafist principality in Syria to go against Assad, and openly admitting that we were siding with Al-Qaeda.
Yep.
And Michael Flynn is not like a Ron Paul or anything. Let me make this clear. He's bad on a lot of other stuff, but on Syria, he was telling the truth and showing what Hillary was doing. And then he was supposed to have Bolton's job, right? And that didn't last long at all because apparently when Israel tried to get the Security Council to veto this resolution condemning their ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and creating settlements in the West Bank, Michael Flynn had called everybody, not just the Russians, but everybody on the Security Council, the French, the English, and so on, and to try to get on behalf of Israel, per request of Jared Kushner, who was at the request of Benjamin Netanyahu, for Flynn to go and do this. They ignored why he was calling. They ignored that he called the entire Security Council, and they focused on, you had a phone call with Russia. Ooh, they are allowed to do that, by the way.
Right.
So he had called all of them. It didn't work either. The U.S. abstained, and everyone else in the world voted yes and for this resolution, which is usually the case. Everyone votes yes, the U.S. votes no, and they kill it, right? Because they are colonizing the West Bank. I mean, that is, nothing will happen. It's just sort of finger waving because they're not going to enforce anything, whatever. But Obama abstained once he became a lame duck, and he wasn't going to be in office anymore and didn't care. And he has a really bad personal relationship with Netanyahu, even though he did everything for Israel. These two hate each other. So that was what got Flynn in trouble, was making a call to Russia. I'm like, isn't it more disturbing that the Israeli prime minister, through Jared Kushner, and he used to sleep in Charles Kushner's house, a convicted felon, by the way, and that he was going to have the Kushners influence Trump's security advisor to call the heads of the UN, of the Security Council, and try and persuade them to vote otherwise. And then later you'd end up with Nikki Haley doing it openly. I mean, she couldn't have enough fellatio to Israel, but we would call her Icky Nikki. Say she's doing cocaine in the Knesset.
Interesting that Benjamin Netanyahu was recently charged with, I think, some kind of fraud, and then recently just won another term as prime minister.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's been a lot of people trying to. I mean, I'm not.
We had a tie, actually.
I'm not saying he's innocent by any means, but the deliberate and obvious actions that were very public of the Obama administration to try and oust Netanyahu from office was, I mean, it was blatant. And we talk about how many nations the United States tries to. What's that?
The timing of it also, because he probably is guilty of campaign finance, breaking campaign finance laws, and his wife was as well. But why do you bring that up 9 days before the election?
That's one of those silly charges. That's like, again, handing out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. It's like they all do that shit. Dude.
Got indicted because she spent $100,000 on personal chefs of state money. But I'm like, all of them do that kind of stuff. You know, it's just. But it wasn't Obama pushing that one. It was the Blue and White Party, which they actually scored a tie. Netanyahu narrowly won, and so he'll be prime minister or
Well,
is prime minister.
but we actually diverted money into Israel to Netanyahu's opponent to try and oust him back when Obama was in office, of course.
Oh yeah, Obama hated him, and he hated Obama. I mean, it was a, and let me tell you, and you guys know I don't like Benjamin Netanyahu, but I'll tell you what, there's a lot worse than him, unfortunately.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
my ones. Netanyahu's kind of caught in the crosshairs because on the one hand he's got realpolitik and he understands you can't just go genocide people and just bomb whoever you want. But most of the Israeli public, they want more blood. They want to kill more Palestinians and Syrians and Hezbollah and the rest of it.
And we see that every day. It's just not reported in mainstream news. There's so many kids killed over there. And unfortunately, it's always in this narrative like, well, they were throwing rocks, they were throwing bombs. It's always the reaction, nothing that provoked the action.
Soldier. Yeah, 66 people killed this week, or shot this week. And not killed, shot. And they just killed a 15-year-old boy this morning. Like, it's just...
That sounds like Chicago in a day.
Yeah, it's actually less than a bad weekend in Chicago.
But it's not Chicago. It's Israel. It's one we give almost $4 billion a year or whatever it is.
Soldiers, kids. I mean, it's
what I'm saying. We basically support. I mean, and again, it's not anti-Semitic to just be able to say facts, dude. It's like I get it.
It has nothing to do with being Jewish. It's like if I want to criticize North Korea, it doesn't make me anti-Asian.
Thank you.
Like,
Thank you.
That's ridiculous. Like. Jews live everywhere. A lot of them live in Israel and a lot of them live wherever, but it's got nothing to do with biology or anything like that. This is a state policy. It's a bad state. And, just like when I'm criticizing Lincoln doesn't mean I hate what a was.
America.
Hate him,
right.
Hate America or something like.
So with the resolution of, the Mueller report, supposedly, vindicated, exonerated, whatever term you want to use, on the heels of that,
Did you watch Rachel Maddow's breakdown?
I did. Of course. We've spoken about it more than once on the show. Roger had a bad day that day. Does
she go by she or he?
I just call her Roger Maddow. I mean, I'm just assuming she doesn't.
Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes are one and the same.
Well, I mean,
they're saving money. They're saving money. Throw a suit on one, a blouse on the other.
Rachel's the more masculine version of
Chris
Hayes.
I'm telling you. Well, it's just like they're both like Pat on Saturday Night Live, the old Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. So she just puts on bigger glasses and becomes Chris. Sometimes.
She actually, I'm gonna, I'll go there, man. Like I've said this on the show. There's a picture I think when she was in college, where she was actually pretty freaking hot, and I think this is way before Hillary turned her out. But she had some nice long sandy blonde locks and looked, Not that it matters how she looks. I'm just objectifying her. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. She's a beautiful, smart lady.
She looked like a Fox commentator.
Well, now she's got the high and tight. But, I mean, watching her weep was just fantastic because they invested so much in literally a lie. And
it's amazing because if you do want to get on the president's case, there's plenty of stuff. Like I made a long movie of things, shady things that Trump had done before he was president and working with the mob in New Jersey and all this. But they don't talk about that because they can't, because their own politicians are even more guilty of the same thing.
See, and this is what I've said 10 trillion times, Patrick, and you will attest. He's Michael Corleone at the end of Godfather 1. He's a gangster, but he's taking out the old gangsters and bringing in his new gangster. You can't be a New York real estate tycoon and not have some stuff back there. You know what I mean? And I'm not knocking his hustle because this is that.
Look. Here's the deal, though. Are you okay with the status? Were you okay with the status quo?
I'd rather have Trump. If I'm picking. I'll pick the mafia over most of the government. I think Vegas was way better with the mob than it is now. Like,
the
mob have some rules.
They operate out of honor and a handshake, don't they?
They got a code, and it just works better than the state. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely.
And Trump, he rubbed elbows with some people, but like you said, you're not going to be a billionaire in New York without having to deal with the mob. You have to. Like,
I mean, even just the presidential level period, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're Jimmy Carter. Like, there's something there. There's something to get to that level. You just have to have something going on that's just, not necessarily on the up and up. And that's just presidential politics.
Shoot you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no lone gunslingers in this mix. And that kind of leads me to this next question Pat and I have talked about. And I whatever, there's no real order to this. But, you got Julian Assange being arrested. You got Bob Barr days after Trump is essentially whatever. Mueller's report comes out and says, you know what? I now want to kind of investigate how all this bullshit got started. And then
did you see too? They're all like, Julian Assange has been arrested because he was a Russian agent. Like that's what they're saying.
I saw it was
already.
I saw it because the UK said that he had bail jumped and they're going to keep him for 12 months or whatever. But the
did do that.
The 4D whatever you want to call it. Pat and I talked about it the other day because I was super, and I'm still just like, with the deplatforming of people and, you know, making truth illegal, talking about truth being illegal or whatever in whatever form or fashion, you know, Pat had alluded to not just like Q so much, but this notion
to cheer his ass up.
He
I
did.
had to save him. I had to talk him down off the ledge. In his own words.
I was pissed.
Let me put this.
Well, hold on, Ryan. So the 4D rip is he's bringing Julian Assange into U.S. custody, so they now can fully divulge. Was it Seth Rich? What was going on? These emails, and that will kind of get to a lot of the root of where what Bob Barr was talking about, where this Trump investigation started.
The discovery process of the court case will show where these documents came from, and it will lead back to Seth Rich, and that Seth Rich was murdered, and many other things are going to be proven true because they're going to have to be admitted in court because they're accusing him of hacking government and military websites, and he's going to have to prove that he did not. And they're going to, like I said, they're going to have to trace all these documents back, where they came from, prove where they came from. And I'm telling you right now, in my mind, it's a home run. This is exactly what's going on.
I was getting ready to say when I said, "Let me give you this white pill." Can you imagine if he's not suicided, and Julian Assange, because that's what I worry about. But if he does get to talk and he says, "Seth Rich was the leaker," or just anybody in the DNC, it wasn't Russia, it was so and so.
Yes.
But haven't IT experts already proven that it wasn't a hack? It was actually.
But Assange could speak specifically to who it was.
And the FBI and like the NSA knows, and I know like Scott Horton knows journalists who talked to the person that leaked, and they were in the DNC. He didn't say it was Seth Rich or not, because you don't want to get shot yourself.
Right. Exactly.
So, but I looked into like, okay, if you're gonna have a contract killing, who does Hillary usually use, like from what area and all? And they probably put them up in a 5-story hotel because that's their style. So you see some unusual South American names in the area at a 5-star hotel who have a history of, well, let's see, one of them had been in jail and gotten pardoned, for example.
Are you saying MS-13?
If I'm not saying, I'm just saying somebody from the South up there that happened to stay in this hotel, and one of them had already been to prison, gotten out, and staying in a 5-star hotel at the exact same time. Yeah, there could be a contract killing, but I'm not gonna put my neck out there. I just, I got my limits, and because it's also just circumstantial, and if I'm wrong, it would really be bad for that person. So I'm not gonna say names, but it does look like a contract killing and linked back to Hillary, and it wasn't Russia for sure, and we know it was a DNC insider. So even if it wasn't Seth Rich, you don't need that conspiracy to be true to debunk blaming Russia for all of it and saying Assange is a Russian agent, he's an intelligence asset.
Right.
WikiLeaks
bringing up the Swedish-Russian case
of
rape
documents
shit
on
again.
Russia that were used in Russian court cases, like what were damaging to them. So that would be a pretty silly asset to have. But no, WikiLeaks started as an anti-China faction, and apparently grew a conscience or whatever, and decided to release on everyone, and they did.
What do you see happening now?
Truth to power.
He's in British custody, supposedly going to be extradited. What do you see as that next phase? Do you see this scenario as likely as Pat explained? Like this.
I think that's totally possible. I think that would be the best possible. But Britain is now saying they won't extradite him to any countries that torture or have the death penalty. Now, the U.S. does torture, but officially we don't. It's just enhanced interrogation, or we rendition them to some other place and then torture them over there where it's legal. So I don't think that counts. But we do have the death penalty, but it depends on which state, right? And so, but what they'll say is, well, the charges he's currently on don't warrant the death penalty. But after he's in the U.S., they could pile on new charges and then execute him
exactly.
anyway.
Because it sounds like right now they're just pinching him for 5 years. I wouldn't want to go to a federal joint for 5 years, but Bradley Manning got 35 and then got it commuted by Obama. But they're only hitting up Assange with supposedly 5 years until, like you said, they might pile on some more stuff once they get him. Or Pat's scenario that this is all just to get him into custody to really start divulging the real deal on what was in these emails, etc.
Well, they put Manning back in jail shortly before this.
I saw
as
that.
well,
I saw that.
trying to cover the whole thing. But it's like Russiagate fell apart, and so they immediately go to how can we keep this alive, right? Oh, we'll get Assange and say he did it Russia, because that's the whole reason why he was in an Ecuadorian embassy anyway, was he was accused of hacking the DNC. Right? He didn't hack the DNC. It was a leak. There was no hack.
Right.
And there was an insider. And the reason a lot of people believe it was Seth Rich and why that makes sense is because a DNC insider was murdered and they didn't take his wallet or anything else. But they're not even looking to see who it could be. They're trying to cover it up. And it fits Hillary's MO. Because remember, like with Benghazi, they made up this stupid story about, a video on YouTube from July suddenly pissed off Muslims on September 11th, months later. And it's because they're mad at a YouTube film, and that's why they killed Ambassador Stevens and attacked him. Come on. She also gave the whopper about the Saudi used car salesman that was going to blow up Israelis at a coffee shop or something and work for Hezbollah in Mexico. Like, it was so convoluted.
Ryan, at this point, what difference does it make?
Because I just say,
I'm joking, Katz. That's what Hillary said. That's what Hillary said.
Is
green pantsuit on right now, Jeff?
What'd you say?
Green
pantsuit on right now.
Does what?
You have a green pantsuit on right now.
No, that's what she said at the whatever those hearings. She's like, at this
CTE memory is. That's what Hillary was wearing when she said, "What does it matter?"
At this point, what difference does it make?
Got the color that she's wearing a pantsuit is pretty good guess at any time, really.
Yeah, but green.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe it was St. Patrick's Day. I have to look up the date. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
There's orange on that day. She's a monster, man, and she just of course I'm hoping for the good scenario. I don't want them to pile on charges and execute Assange. I really don't think.
You think they would execute him?
I don't. Oh, they'd love to if they could, but they can't. I don't think they can get away with that because the public globally.
Well, I mean, Manning was the precursor to any whatever he supposedly charged with doing was in tandem with her or him, and he's out, or now he got locked back up. But I'm thinking, U.S. custody is the safest place for those guys to be if they want to start the debrief.
To transcend sides, because your anti-war factions, your libertarians, etc., anybody for free speech, they were on Manning's side because all he did was tell the truth. And yeah, we did kill civilians in Iraq and da-da-da-da-da. And then he had good optics because as a homosexual / transgender soldier leaking to this guy with white hair, that got all the shitloads and stuff on the side because it's like good optics. It's like, oh, they're automatically on the side for virtue signaling purposes. And then other people were on his side out of principled purposes because what he did was the right thing. So you have this cross-tribal siding with Manning and WikiLeaks, which is why that one got to be the forefront. Because there was Cryptomy and Scribs and a whole bunch of sites. Like, I'd seen the collateral damage video years before it was on WikiLeaks. I had that on my site. Like, it was like, we're looking around going, duh. Like, everything that came out of WikiLeaks was already on the internet anyway. But it created a sort of central hub, and it was acceptable to the left because of Manning and the transgender and da-da-da-da, and it was acceptable to the anti-war. And so it was like, ooh, you can't use that tribal division anymore. We got good optics and principles. What you going to do now? Well, we're going to throw them all in jail. That's what we're going to do. Right. So they did. And but, Manning gets commuted, and there's a lot of pressure on Obama to do that. And that's like one good thing he did. I can't think of anything else he did right.
I was pretty surprised when he did that because he's deep state as it gets, and that collateral murder thing or whatever the name of that video. I mean, the volumes and volumes of files that they unloaded of people giving reports of just blatant murder that was happening, men, women, children, etc. I mean, it was absolutely.
But I mean, that's how it's been since World War II. I mean, we've gotten worse.
For sure. But again, in a place we didn't need to be in the first place, and we could go back to Gulf of Tonkin. We were talking about Daniel Ellsberg on one of our recent lives, and how regardless of what anybody thinks about Daniel Ellsberg, his divulging of what was going on in Vietnam gave us understanding of what was going on in the My Lai massacre, and just
Cy Hirsch,
same thing
in Syria too.
And in a place we didn't need to, not only didn't need to be, it was an illegal incursion. Like all the bullshit we talk about, why we go into other countries because they're killing their own people or whatever.
I would say worse than that. It was fabricated and illegal because we went on false pretext.
Well, of course, that's what I'm saying. Based off a lie, all those people died. Americans, the Vietnamese, based off of literally a lie. But
same with Iraq.
Same thing, illustrations of WMDs.
The Vietnamese did not fire on a U.S. ship. The Israelis did, and Johnson covers that one up with the USS Liberty. So we killed 2 million Vietnamese people. All we do to Israel is give them more money.
A year.
Disgusting.
It's crazy.
But he was sleeping with Matilda Krim, who's an Irgun terrorist. Right there on his range. That's what he was doing on the night
Irgun.
of the,
that's you start talking about Irgun. That's Rahm Emanuel and Ari Emanuel's dad. He used to roll with Irgun, blowing shit up back in the day.
There was in the Stern gang.
Lovely folks.
Yeah, lovely terrorist groups. But that's that goes on the same thing in the Islamic world. Who did we back? Mujahideen. We created Al Qaeda. We backed Al Nusra. We backed Al Sham, and indirectly ISIS.
Think about this. Let me make a point though about this. Now, as far as the Mujahideen and all that sort of stuff, trying to shut down Russia, make them struggle, make them spend massive amounts of money, the arms buildup that Reagan put them in the arms race and all that sort of stuff to try and break the bank. I almost saw, and it's not justified in my mind, but it's certainly a better reason to fund terrorists to defend their own nation against a Russian incursion, in my mind, than it is to fund ISIS for what they have been doing in Syria, just to simply overthrow a leader of a nation that, frankly, they didn't give Christians a hard time. They didn't give even some Jews a hard time that lived in Syria. People lived in relative peace. I mean, there were a lot of Christian churches in Syria.
Oldest ones, and they were protected, unlike in Israel where they burned the miracle.
Right. So what I'm saying is there's a big difference in my mind, and certainly a level of evil in what's been done in Syria, and of course Iraq and Libya and Yemen and everything else that's going on. There's different reasons for that, and very, very evil ones in my mind. I mean, do you see the difference?
Well, supporting the Mujahideen, first of all, Carter starts that prior to Russia invading Afghanistan, not as a reaction to it. So I'm saying we went there to fight the Russians. The Russians went there to meet us because we were there first. The other thing is, though, supporting the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union, I don't have a problem with. The Al-Qaeda portion of the Mujahideen was a Charlie Wilson kind of business opportunity where we realized, let's use this incursion, and then we're going to have a breakaway faction where we can use proxy forces anywhere we feel like.
And this goes back
to cover of fighting with the Mujahideen and Northern Alliance. But the Al-Qaeda part, all the diaspora foreign fighters that joined in Afghanistan with Osama bin Laden, Tim Osman, we had a data list of these fighters which could be thrown into conflict wherever needed. And they were like Iran Contra. I mean, publicly denounced it, privately we're supporting it, and supporting it not only with narcotics but with contraband. And also we trained the pilots and the rest of it. I mean, you guys know, but the idea was you couldn't have a head-on collision in a nuclear age. So proxy forces were the modern privateers. I think we spoke about
this literally goes back to chapter 1, the first 2 chapters, or the first 2 paragraphs almost of chapter 1 of Zbigniew Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard, of the U.S. always needing to have some kind of destabilizing force in Eurasia.
Yep.
And he was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. So when you're talking about Jimmy Carter, he was pretty much the architect of this foreign policy. And like you said, it continues today, and it goes back to, like you said, their old privateers. When Spain didn't want to be known for attacking France, they would hire this group, and then they were the private, to kind of the proxy force.
Yeah. If you're a pirate, all you can do is personally arrest that pirate and hang him. It doesn't go back to the state.
Exactly. Plausible deniability has been around for a long time.
The British were the masters of it, and one of my ancestors was a privateer, Blackbeard, became a straight-up pirate later. But yeah, they're just terrorists or pirates on land, and it's a way of saying, "Wow, I never heard of these guys." And there's so many layers now in between whatever intelligence agency, whether it's FSB, CIA, Mossad, whatever, and the puppet, that they don't even know that they're being puppeteered. A lot of Al-Qaeda legitimately, seriously hates the United States and wants to kill them.
Yep.
They don't know they're getting logistical, financial, and physical armed support from a state.
And can you think about that, ladies and gentlemen? Think about 9/11. That happened in 2001. Cats who are susceptible, who might have family members killed, are now 20, 21 years old. So I mean, you have a full fighting force, and I guess they call that backlash or whatever you want to call it. But going to the kind of the root of a lot of the things
soldiers in Afghanistan that were not born when that conflict started
are now, willing to die for it. Exactly.
Babies that were born on September 11th, could be in Afghanistan now. They'd be over 18.
Exactly.
That's mind blowing.
Well,
we've been at war with Afghanistan for 18 years.
Far too long.
I should have gotten into the arms dealing.
Patrick.
I'd have a mansion right now. I'd have a mansion.
You could.
Right now.
You could have just bought stock in Raytheon, Halliburton, and Lockheed, and sat back and did nothing.
I'd be headed for hell post life, but I'd be rolling large right now.
Well, your thoughts generally, bro, because we talk about this a lot, like the dynamic of all this, the grand chessboard, what's going on. Trump kind of pulled back on quote unquote funding ISIS, and now ISIS is now no longer a prominent force in Syria, supposedly. But what's going on with Trump? He's clearly not truly an independent, is he? I mean, he's beholden somewhat to Israel. He's got Goldman Sachs people surrounding him. Like, what's larger picture? Like, what's going on?
He's really bad at picking people, because he's got John Bolton.
For sure.
Kushner is married into his family, so he weaseled his way in.
But part of my larger question again, also, Iran. You have these targets that have been in the neocon sites for years, and now he's talking about Iran, North Korea, etc. Is he just a horse of a different color, or is he really something different?
Trump's always been bad on Iran. I mean, he's been good on certain things, at least with rhetoric for immigration. He was better on Syria than Hillary was, and he's done deregulation. He's talking to North Korea, and so he's got a little bit of freedom, like when it doesn't involve the Middle East. Israel didn't care what you do with North Korea or whatever. But when it comes to Iran, Trump's always been like, get rid of the Iran deals, and they're the biggest purveyor of terrorism. He just labeled their Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Like, really? They're terrorists, but MEK isn't? Like, unreal. But if you look at it, a lot of it's window dressing stuff. It's like, abstract stuff, kind of like moving the embassy or declaring Golan Heights part of Israel. Like, that doesn't make it so. That's just your opinion on these things. That doesn't really move the capital, and that doesn't really make that Israel's. It's just like a lot of hot air, There's nothing like concrete about it. But he's been mouthing off about Iran constantly. And he has done a few cruise missile strikes in Syria on that behalf, under that rhetoric. But, a real war with Iran, first of all, you can't do it unless you finish Yemen first. And you really can't do it because, short of nuclear weapons, it would just be too many casualties.
Well, you're dealing with Russia and China getting involved. If you go into Iran flat out, you're asking for Russia and China to come in, and that's a global cataclysm.
Even Iran itself, we'd lose 10,000 guys. We'd win, but do we want to lose 10? I don't want to. For what? They're not a threat to the United States.
Right.
It's really clear. We don't need to be in Iran. Yeah. But he'll continue the sanctions, and probably they'll use the Arab separatist group, Mujahideen al-Khalq, and Jundallah, which is a Baluchistani group, will suddenly come into more money and guns, and they'll start a war just like they did in Syria, the same method, by funding these terrorist groups inside Iran. And that's a harassment campaign. You're not going to topple it like that. But really, the reason I say they have to get Yemen first is because if Saudi Arabia doesn't get coastal real estate, then they can't circumvent the Strait of Hormuz. And in the event of a war, the first thing Iran would do is close the Strait of Hormuz. And that would be like a global lockdown on oil and gas from the second largest reserves on Earth. And it would block Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, part of the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So they're not going to do it. Like Europe and Asia and everyone that isn't as independent on energy as the United States would say, that ain't happening. So there's a war in Yemen, and they are going to set up a port city in northeast Yemen and connect a pipeline to it. After that, then Iran needs to really worry. But until that happens, we're not going to war in Iran. And they know it. That's why they're fighting in Yemen.
Yeah.
But we did have a resolution to stop that, our participation in it, now that it's practically done and Saudi Arabia is going to win anyway. But, if we
with
stop,
our weapons, hell yeah.
Right. Well, what's funny is they're using our latest weapons, the kind that are built for all the bells and whistles, not actual function. Like F-15, great plane. F-16 is a great plane. F-35, not so much. It's got every problem you can imagine. And
well, it's got so many moving parts. I mean, that thing it's so technologically advanced. I think that they moved a little quick on it, because I saw one of those fly out in Virginia, at Virginia Beach, when I was on a base out there, and it was hitting maneuvers I didn't even fathom were possible for an airplane. I'm telling you,
it can move, but
dude,
the thing
I'm telling you, man, the hydraulic plates in the belly of it that'll drop out, and that thing would stop on a dime and make a 90-degree turn out of nowhere. I couldn't believe it, what I was seeing. It was. But
they have to get repaired after every lift to get all the gook and stuff. For the stealth has to be reapplied. Their oxygen's knocking out the pilots. The information on the helmet display.
Sure, I'm just saying what I saw it do in the air is.
They definitely have. Oh, they definitely can turn and stop and do what jets are supposed to do.
It's reverse engineered UFO tech, dude. Come on, we all know this.
We just had one crash here.
I've flown in an F-18. I've flown in an F-18 Tomcat, and I can tell you that F-35 is doing stuff that
that's another Douglas
wouldn't even begin to be able to do.
But the it's $1.5 trillion. I hope so. But we had one crash.
Jeez, are you kidding me?
So an F-35 just fell into the ocean. They don't know why, off of Japan.
I saw that. Did they retrieve that? Did the U.S. or Russia or anybody retrieve that?
Well, the U.S. they're not going to let Russia retrieve it, but Japan has to retrieve. I believe got it today, located where it was or whatever. I think the pilot was missing for days too. Like this happens. We had one crash in Florida, another one crashed in South Carolina. Like they've got a lot of problems with the onboard computer and so it's so technically advanced. Like it's glitch here or there, and it's got problems with the oxygen uptake and all. They focus so much on like, well, look at this cool stuff it could do in an air show or whatever, but they made the wrong size. It didn't fit with any landing hook with their Navy, so it couldn't land on a carrier. So they had to make an F-35C, F-35B, and but I'm telling you, like, this is on purpose. I mean, you know what planned obsolescence is. So the reason they have to reapply the stealth every time is they made it that way on purpose. Like, the more it costs, the better. Because they're not paying for it.
You got to justify that budget.
I got to justify that $1.5 trillion they put into it. Parts made in Vermont, by the way, and Bernie Sanders voted for all of it, so they know that.
Feel the burn. He's
so anti-corporate. He gives the largest. That's more money went to Lockheed Martin last year, or as much money as the entire State Department. Wow.
What?
That's a big budget.
If you look up Lockheed Martin, America's largest welfare queen, is the article I wrote, and it links to about 20 different articles showing the problems with that's
always been that way with defense contractors, dude.
Always has, But man, I'll tell you what, that's been like Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, like all the typical.
What did my man say, dude? War is a racket.
Yeah, Smedley Butler. They if you haven't read that, by the way, not you guys, but the audience, like, get that. War is a racket.
Well, watch the video where he's like, yeah, this fascist government basically was trying to get me in the military to have a coup against FDR. I mean, it's like he's saying it. It's like on video. It's not even just us talking about it.
It's not surprising to us. But like you say, you're already in like Alice in Wonderland land, because the more you know, the weirder it gets. Because everything you heard as a kid was BS, pretty much.
What's going on in Africa, man? It seems like China's moving in Africa. It seems like Africa's kind of always been on the list as far as what it's always.
Massive civil war in Libya right now. I mean, Haftar's got Tripoli surrounded. He's retaken
Gaddafi's son, right?
Yeah, and he's got he's realized, and he's showing the entire world that violence is the only way to deal with a bully, not negotiation.
I saw that video you said, and that's very true. Very true.
I mean, he went up there with tanks is what he did. Like, you can negotiate from a position of strength with a bully, but after everything that happened in Libya, I mean, how this hard. They had reinstituted slavery in 2012.
Right? Crazy. You don't even hear anything about that.
You're virtue signaling about they're calling Trump a racist and all this BS, and I'm like he's lying. He's not racist. Come on. But they Hillary and Obama reinstituted North African slave trade in Libya. I mean, talk about racist.
It is crickets in the mainstream media. Crickets.
It is. It's like, well, you killed a bunch of black and brown people. You blew them up, but that doesn't matter. He said a bad word on a bus or whatever.
Well, I mean, I was speaking. There is, supposedly in the news. I mean, there is not supposedly in the news. Like, the Muslims are like going around killing all these Christians, and it's so kind of underreported. Like I said,
Nigeria.
Yeah, and just all these kind of moves on Africa. Like, it's always kind of been. Whether it's the Belgians or the English or whatever. But you got the Mozambique and the Chinese and all this stuff going on in South Africa.
Yeah, Belgium definitely wins in the death count, but after that, it's probably African on African. At least recently.
You look at Rwanda, dude. That was like almost 1 million in like 3 months. Less than 3 months.
Well, Paul Kagame, who's the leader of Rwanda, is what came from Ugandan intelligence, and he's backed by the United Kingdom. 60% of their budget comes from the UK, and they went into the DRC, and I almost said DNC by mistake. They went into the Republic of the Congo. And they killed over 1 million people. That's modern times. That's like 2000.
Never again, ladies and gentlemen. Never again.
So let's hit on this.
The Horn of Africa is getting better, though. That Eritrea and Somalia and Ethiopia are starting to get along. Thomas C. Mountain.
Yeah, we've imported all the terrorists over here to Minneapolis.
They're all in
Patrick J.
They're all in Minnesota, dude.
Dude, did you see the guy? Not to completely digress, but the guy in the Mall of America that threw a kid off the
5-year-old off the freaking.
I didn't see it, but I read about
like 3 stories. Like, and I guess he's still fighting for his life. Like, what the hell,
dude? They arrested this man.
Bigger picture, guys. Bigger picture.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Patrick. I'm sorry.
Bigger picture. Let's go out to the 1,000-foot. I want to hit on this and because it's not been discussed yet, and it's not been discussed in the bigger picture by most people. They're seeing the Notre Dame cathedral fire, and then I've
sad.
recently found videos of celebrating Muslims shouting Al Akbar, and pictures of Muslims in the crowd smiling and giving the peace sign and laughing and stuff about this. So, but here's the thing. I'm not offended by that. That's ignorance, and it is what it is. And it's the manipulation and controlling of the mindset of people on all sides of religion. But what's the bigger picture is that we need to look at is there've been numerous attacks on churches and fires on churches.
Is Notre Dame arson, or just we don't?
It sounds like what they were saying was that it was numerous small fires were started, and then
that's probably
this comes on the heels of, like you said, Pat, 12, 14.
Let me
both towers survived, and most of the internal, like, older things.
The French Revolution, and the World War I, World War II, all that good stuff. So, but here's the thing: at the same time as the the fire in France and the Notre Dame Cathedral burning, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem was on fire also. So what I think people need to start
today,
people need to come out to that 1,000-foot viewpoint and understand that this is a bigger picture, that all the stuff that's going on in Africa, the stuff that's going on in Europe, the things that are starting to happen, the destruction of the Middle East that the globalists have basically unleashed, and then the flood of migrants into Europe to destroy migrant and the clash of civilizations there. This is not happening by accident.
No, sir.
That's the phrase, the clash of civilizations.
Exactly.
And this is written out in policy papers by our little friends. And there is a extreme right-wing party, and they are a minority, but they are, that have already put a tunnel under the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They did that in the 80s. And the plan was, the real Samson option is not Israel's nuclear weapons. It's to blow up the mosque and blame it on Christians and set Muslim versus Christian in a giant clash of civilizations.
Because according to prophecy, supposedly the Messiah can't come unless the Al-Aqsa Mosque is destroyed and rebuilt.
Right, and they have to build a temple on the mount, and there are people who sincerely believe that garbage, and they want, well, whether they believe it because they sincerely have religious views, or they just see the advantages of getting Christians and Muslims to tear each other apart, whatever. But that's the plan.
I don't care what anybody says. When you go back and you read, and people call it a farce, people call me a lunatic. My fellow Freemasons say that I'm an asshole for even bringing up Albert Pike's letter to Mazzini, that it's been debunked, everything else, whatever. But I've known about that thing for at least a decade, longer. And
I've got video footage of them there was an attempt, I think it was in 83, don't quote me on that, but where an Australian Christian, like Patsy, attempted to blow up the mosque from underneath, but how could he even reach it without the tunnels that had already been built? And there was also an attempt to hit it with bus bombs. And they actually killed several Palestinian activists with car bombs, and the plan was to go in there with a tourist bus, and they were going to hit the mosque, but the cops stopped it. So there are nuts out there that are seriously consider something. If you did that, it would be an irreversible situation.
Well, that's kind of supposedly what was going on with the Notre Dame thing today. Apparently, 3 days ago, a woman was convicted and sentenced, I think, 8 years to a crime she committed in 2016 relating to bombing and setting aflame the Notre Dame. What happened today, essentially. So,
but it's not still as important historically. Even if you're not religious, it's a historical building. It's very important religious building. It's a very important cultural building, but it doesn't hold the same significance that it would have in the past with Christian Europe, the way that the Al-Aqsa Mosque does for the Islamic world. They are deeply religious. It governs, every aspect of their life for a lot of people.
Sure.
Whereas a lot of Christians in Europe are just
Yes,
sort of
sir.
tacitly Christian.
Do you remember me talking about false flags?
We've been talking about it for weeks,
Yeah,
years.
We knew this is this the false flags? Is this what the deep state needs?
This is one of them.
Literally a religious war in Europe.
It's what do you say, or what have I heard? The dying by a million slices, or whatever the fuck it is. But it's this is what you guys had just alluded to, and I wrote it down. I was going to ask the culture, the clash of civilizations, East versus West. This has been going on forever, and I've said many a times, literally, man, the level of psychological trauma that was put on most people on 9/11, from not just one plane crashing into a building, two planes crashing into a building, one building collapsed, another building collapsed, the Pentagon, Shanksville, it fucked our mind, and it opened this huge checkbook, not only financially, but even in our own mind, do whatever you got to do to glass parking lot those motherfuckers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And that's what we're seeing manifest.
Somebody got us to go to war with their enemies, because prior to 9/11, if somebody was Muslim in the United States, it just was whatever, okay. It was less than 0.5% of the population, not really bothering anybody. Okay, you're Muslim, whatever. After 9/11, it would probably be scary to be Muslim in New York. It was deeply burned in everyone's consciousness.
Dude, they were attacking Sufis that night. Those few nights I was hearing about, Sufis being.
Yeah, you got a turban, so that's America got its two front teeth knocked out, and suddenly in the conscience of every American was Middle East Muslim. They're the bad guys. And then we ended up invading Iraq for some reason. But prior to 9/11, it just people didn't care enough to even think about, oh, you're Muslim or you're Jew or you're, Hindu. No one cares. Like right now, no one cares if you're Hindu.
Well,
right?
I mean, I
in
somewhat
America,
disagree,
right?
dude. I mean, I don't know how old you are exactly, but I remember, the Ayatollah thing, the hostages, etc. There was always kind of this East versus West thing going.
Hollywood had done its best. I mean, because there was an airplane hijacking and you had Munich and all that. And there was like, they kept it alive with True Lies and all this. Like Arabs hijacked planes. Remember that time? And so it was in movies a lot. But it still was just like, maybe worried while you're on a plane. But after 9/11, it was
full on. Full on.
It's on, dude.
Yeah.
Like you're right. It wasn't zero before because and Hollywood had preached it. But Hollywood can't give you the psychological shock that see in the Twin Towers.
I've seen so many interviews of kids, man. They're more grown now, but kids who are like, man, I enlisted the next day. 9/12, I enlisted.
Yeah. It's that Kennedy got shot moment. The president's died. Like everybody remembers where they were when they heard the news.
Right.
Well, and the willingness just to go to war. You know what I mean? We didn't even have the facts yet, but because the psychological trauma was so deep, you have kids who really wound up suffering or not even coming home who were like, you know what? I'm signed up. It takes me back to the Band of Brothers.
First thing I thought of, I was scared because I'm like, man, somebody's gonna get annihilated.
Well, the Band of Brothers, if you've seen that series, man, hearing talking about Easy Company, some of those kids who couldn't get in and couldn't make it, there would be suicide rates with kids who couldn't get in to fight in World War II because they were so bought and sold on, they were defending the red, white, and blue. And I'm not in no way just besmirching anybody's service, man. I love the fact that people, it's a huge thing to have, sacrificed the hugest thing in the world, but it's like,
what you're saying is you're sick of our people dying.
Yes,
so many of them die. There's so many veteran suicides today, and a lot of them they go over with all the best intentions, and they defending their culture, their honor, their people, and they get there and they see what ends up really happening most of the time, and some of the abuses they're forced to either look the other way or engage in themselves, and they come home and they kill themselves. They can't live with themselves. Like they're not only forced to risk their life, they're stuck in a situation where it's like, well, you got to fight your way out or you're not coming home. But the people in Afghanistan, they know that our own Northern Alliance is raping little boys, and they have to just say nothing. And soldiers that spoke out against it got court-martialed, and Pat Tillman got murdered over it, blue on blue. And they know what we're doing. They know like some of the sides that we're on in Iraq and Syria are chopping off heads and torture and all the rest of it, and they've seen what's really going on in the corporate greed, and they're like, oh my gosh. And and people are like, man, you're a hero, and they're thinking, well, I don't know, we did some pretty terrible things. And them personally, it's like they don't have because they volunteered, like no one forced them to go, makes it worse, because it's like, and I volunteered to do that. Like obviously they assumed it wasn't going to be what it was. But many soldier I talked to coming back, like at the recent anti-APAC conference, there was a gentleman there, and he had half his face was all scarred up from an IED, and then he got run over by a Jeep also, survived both things. But his face was pretty gnarly from the incidents, and he was all, I knew he was military right away because he's all, yes, sir, that even to me, and like, you don't have to say sir all the time, but it couldn't break the habit. But his his stories and the stories of people in his unit, like it's like there was no reason to do what we did at Fallujah, and it just made it worse. Like it made more people hate us and more people joined the resistance. And the neocons think you can fix everything just by hammering it enough. They don't realize, like, well, how would the U.S. react if somebody just burned New Jersey or something? Well, not New Jersey.
Whatever incursion.
Somebody just burned Miami or something like that. We'd all be like, "Fuck you,"
exactly.
And that's what we did in Iraq over and over again. It's like the ones that would have welcomed us, you can forget about that now. Like,
well, I mean, if you think about it, the U.S. government almost did burn Miami to get us to go to war with Cuba.
Yeah, well, that's true. The Paul Nitze and the rest of the Northwoods crew, they were talking about blowing up Americans. McNamara and Kennedy thought that was insane, and it didn't go through. But these guys go on to join global government later, and Nitze sets up the the Aspens Institute, which has a bunch of neocon fellows like Louis Libby and Richard Pearl there today, and Judith Miller was part of that clique too. That's right. That's in Colorado right now. There's the Aspens Institute, and he's a founder. And it's just a who's who list of the worst neocons you can name off the top of your head. They all belong to Aspen. And when Libby did that cryptic letter with Judith Miller when she was in jail for 85 days, and they were talking about their connected roots, they were talking about the Aspen trees, and it's a code for Aspen Institute. And I decoded those jail letters on a show with Mike Rivera way back when. But it goes back to the Northwood crew, and they're the ones crazy enough to blow up a plane full of Americans. And that's like the most infamous part of Northwoods, because even Melonheads talked about it. That's not even the worst ideas they had. If you watch Decades of Deception, it's a film I put out in like 2014, I went over the other things that Northwood had planned, and it's even more crazy.
When this even goes back to what we've talked about many times on the show, Gladio, Operation Gladio. I mean, where people like, no, the government would never do that. Like, wow, you clearly just have not read the history books, because
the government would kill its own people. We just talked about Blair Mountain, but Waco.
Well, any of them, Gulf of Tonkin, I mean, name it.
Yeah. Well, in Gulf of Tonkin, they just lied about an attack. Waco, they
lied about an attack which wound up leading to, the millions of deaths, or even the Milner Group, and we had a podcast about.
Didn't have a choice, and 55 to 58,000 Americans were killed. Millions of Vietnamese were millions. I can't imagine that happening. And look how small that country is too.
Well, again, like you just said a second ago, imagine someone doing that to us, coming over here saying, "Hey, you know what I mean? You attack." It just wouldn't play. And Pat, we've had that conversation about patriotism, like the patriot mantra, et cetera. It's like sovereignty, et cetera. Like we've violated so many people's sovereignty and human rights, et cetera, et cetera. But it just gets rationalized as just war and spreading democracy, and it's insane. It literally is insane to me how like reality kind of gets inverted.
They talk about Islamic this and that, but I'm like, American exceptionalism has killed far more people than terrorists.
Dude, that term right there, I think we are exceptional. I love this fucking country, dude. I love living in America. I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying what is done in our name and has been done in our name is so it's just you can't even quantify it. Like it's ridiculous, man.
Well, what is kind of a silver lining on that is like even the most evil people still recognize it as evil, because they try to couch their intentions when they lie to the public under some do-gooder pretext, which means they're aware of good and evil at least. So they'll say, oh, it's to liberate so-and-so, or this is for the red, white, blue, or this is to fight the commies, or we're the fighting terrorists, or we're fighting some bad thing, or we're trying to do some good thing.
Which is always the false reality placed over the reality.
That's just what's fed to the hoi polloi and the plebs, and then under that is usually some sort of corporate interest or insane.
Yeah, no, the supposed benevolent cause always covers the malevolent, wicked intentions, and that's what trips me out. And I said the other day on our face, I hate to keep alluding to other shit we do. How long are we going to keep signing our kids up to die for bullshit when we know it's bullshit? I mean, we shouldn't just have historical perspective to be like, oh yeah, McNamara said later on down the line, Gulf of Tonkin was horseshit. But in the moment, it was like, God, these goddamn communists, or even after 9/11, these goddamn Muslims or whatever. I mean, it's the same script.
Communism does kill a million people, and it's a horrible ideology. That's got nothing to do with why we're really in Vietnam. That was the helicopter and heroin war. But
that's what they were selling us. They were selling us the whole domino theory bullshit.
Same with like Venezuela. Like, yep, absolutely. Chavez was terrible. And they haven't had a good leader for many decades, really. But it started more with Chavez and price control and really it's narco-socialism down there.
I mean, that goes back to United Fruit, right? Back in fucking the 60s and 70s. People deciding to nationalize shit. And
well, you know who's on the board of United Fruit, right? Dulles.
Of course.
So they're going to use the CIA for the personal aggrandizement of their own companies. No big shock there. Banana wars for 34
Track
years.
two. That was Nixon. I mean, that's just destabilizing shit down there, and then putting in leaders that were more our national interest, etc. That's the other thing. National interest. This is against U.S. national interest. So we can go take out your leader and fix your elections, and et cetera, et cetera.
So can we circle back to what's going on today?
Sure. Let's do that.
I want to, because I think we talked about this last time we had Ryan on. I'm not sure, but I want to know, because it's been my belief from the word go, and the more I see develop on the Russian collusion and the Mueller investigation, that I believe I want your view on this, Ryan. I think you were a bit skeptical maybe last time, but I've talked to.
Well, I've never believed in
that
Russia.
That Mueller was actually brought on by Trump's team, and that this whole thing has been literally the greatest thing ever.
Well, I think it got a good result, but I don't think he was part of Trump's team. Like, they couldn't connect it to Russia because there is no evidence.
No, Pat, can you go back to when? How did Mueller get to Trump? Pat, tell that who that person was, and
that Bannon and Gorka were the ones that steered him in that direction. And here's what I'm saying is, it doesn't make sense when Mueller meets with Trump in Trump Tower. The very next, well, basically after they met, Trump and Mueller both talked to press and said, we don't agree on kind of where we want to go with this FBI, me as head of the FBI. And from my understanding, and I've not been proven incorrect yet, that Mueller had already served in that position for as long as you can possibly serve, and he could not actually be hired back as the head of the FBI. So that meeting, the media assumed and was told that it was Mueller was being interviewed for the job to head up the FBI, which was impossible. Even on Mueller's WikiLeaks page, it talks about that meeting at Trump Tower. It didn't work out for whatever reasons. They didn't agree. Very next day, Rosenstein brings him on as special counsel to investigate the Russian-Trump collusion. And look, we knew from literally the beginning that even before Trump won the election, when they started slamming him with the Russian collusion stuff, we knew it wasn't true, right? I think anybody with one eye and half a brain knew it wasn't true.
Right.
So I'm just saying that it was almost a no-brainer to, I just think maybe, the left, I'm sure, talked to Mueller and said, hey, we need you. But they had Mueller dead to rights for delivering samples of uranium in Russia. They had him dead to rights. There's documents, everything. And I in my mind, believe that they said, listen, dude, you were part of this. We're going to pull your ass out of the swamp. We're going to save you. And you're going to do our bidding, and you're going to bring these people down, and you're going to make it look like you're investigating me. And sure, there's collateral damage. There were people that got caught on process crimes and all this other stuff. Manafort was working with the Podestas when he committed his crimes. So to me, this is leading back to the other side.
Well, if Assange comes out and says,
how do you explain all the massive leaks that WikiLeaks wasn't responsible for?
Well, like I said, even the ones they were responsible for, like, I never came across any of that I had not seen somewhere else already. It was more of like a central hub. And WikiLeaks is like re-reporting stuff they're getting from others. Like, they're not really going in and hacking emails and things. Like, people are willingly leaking them information. But it's a good question you just had, though. If Mueller wasn't if he wasn't doing the meeting for that position, why was he what was he being, and why was he in Trump Towers, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, there was, because again,
if they have him on Uranium One,
I've been not been proven incorrect on my
it's
assertion.
Plausible. It's just, there's a, you can say, well, maybe he was there, maybe they flipped him by using Uranium One and said, you're working for us now because we have this over you.
And there's a pardon waiting. There's a pardon waiting down the line for your ass.
Mm-hmm. It's all possible. I try not to use speculation. Like, even when you can have reasonable speculation. Like, look, all these things make sense and line up, but it's nothing concrete. It's like, well, what if,
Sure, but I mean, there was a lot of things.
Yeah, I think it's very
concrete that our guts
that
hold
can
us
still
to
be
that.
true. Yeah, you don't have to have something concrete for it to be true.
That kind of
I have
baits
to
that
have
larger
something
question of
concrete
like,
to report it though for my site, but just for my opinion, yeah, I might think just from my my own speculation, if we can go in there, I think that Assange is going to get to talk, and he is going to say this was leaked from the inside. It was not hacked by the Russians, and it would be a bombshell if it's Seth Rich, which I believe it was. But even if not, it's still going to be damaging as can be, because they have they put all their eggs in one basket on this Russia BS. And another part of that is they needed to sabotage any working relationship between Trump and Putin early on because of Syria and other reasons. They didn't want. He made it almost impossible for him to have a good relationship with Russia, because if he did anything good with them at all, it's see, it proves what we're saying.
Exactly, yeah.
And we need a good relationship with Russia. Like, why not? We should be wiping out Al Qaeda together. And they basically ensured that wasn't going to happen.
Well, that's what was so absurd when Trump was the transition to getting into office. It's like he was speaking to Russians. Like, yeah, he was speaking to Russians. He was speaking to other foreign people. That's what you do when you transition into being president of the United States. It was just what was normalcy, like you said, became like you said. Oh, you see, like what? He's having diplomatic relations with North Korea. What's the problem? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, he just came in like, I'll do it. I'll talk to him. These international bankers cliques, Putin threw a sizable chunk of oligarchs in prison, or they fled the country to somewhere that didn't have an extradition treaty. But when Boris Berezovsky died, a lot of his media empire went with it, and we had formation of RT and so on from that point forward. And yeah, I mean, Putin was sitting pretty. He got rid of a lot of oligarchs, turned his country around. Not completely. I mean, like the average salary in Russia is only like $9,500. It's pretty abysmal. They've got economic problems, but they've been able to. When we tried to go into Georgia, they just straight up said, "You're not going to South Ossetia," and they used the military, and they didn't back down an inch in their own backyard. I can tell you what, Ukraine's going to be the same thing. If they try and push it and add them to NATO or something, Russia's not going to stand for it. And they're never going to give up the Black Sea port. Remember that incident a few months ago where Russia seized several Ukrainian ships because one tugboat, but two were warships. So like, you don't just go in unchecked into the Black Sea. Like, that's their border basically. Like, you're not getting in. It's also part of the Maritime Silk Road, and so it's all talking up like, "Oh, we're going to send our ships in there," and Russia's like, "We're going to do the same thing." And they called their bluff out. But that's how close we got to a massive international incident. And Trump kind of like calmed that whole thing down, but he had to do it in a very clever way, because any kind of like reasonable relationship with Russia, like, let's not send NATO warships through their strait and test a game of chicken here. They're like, "Oh, you're Putin's puppet." Da, 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 da. I mean, that's some crazy, but there are factions around Trump and in the United States that want a hostile conflict with Russia. Like, that's insane. But that Hillary clique, that's just what they want. Because, yeah, in the end, we'd win. And they don't care how many Americans or NATO forces would be sacrificed. They don't care.
But is it just that? Is it just Russia? Because or is it also like the relationship between Russia and China now, with the China announcing its Chinese yuan, and the whole grand chessboard, the Eurasian dynamic, that power structure seems to be changing. Like you just said, the Silk Road, that one belt, one road, that string of pearls, that maritime route. Isn't that changing? Isn't that changing the whole global? I'm sorry.
Behind Russia.
China's
the way people combine those two, like, Russia's a much bigger threat, but China is stealing they're getting our technology. Israel's giving it to them, and they're reverse engineering planes and stuff. But anyway, Russia is not only a threat to American military hegemony, they are a threat to the media monopoly. RT America, especially, they were registered as a foreign agent even, but that is a viable English news source now, and they often go against the grind. Look at the reporting that RT did on Julian Assange, And everything the mass media, except for Tucker Carlson and a couple others, every other American media outlet did.
I definitely fuck with RT, but it's like people who criticize them, like, what, you're cool with Fox or MSNBC? You're saying it's. I mean, granted, RT is state run essentially, but yeah,
but it's better than what we got. But what it is it's not. They're doing their own propaganda or whatever, but it isn't ours. So it's a threat to our hegemony. Russian state media and Russian military is not under. They're not under our boot, and so they want that last bit of resistance out, and who knows how bad it would get once that's done. And so you got to support a balance. Like, I'm not in favor of the Russian government or military or anything else, but it's just like in markets. I want options. I want competition, because you know what happens under monopoly, right? So it's just being pragmatic, and RT has done a lot of damage to the mass media because it can call them out immediately. RT can report, and the truth.
So you don't see the One Belt One Road locking down like the rail routes, the road routes, and the maritime routes throughout that basically whole Asian region. Any kind of threat or some kind of threat in the next, let's say, 10 years, not immediately.
Well,
but
China's trying to do the naval routes, but right now without the Philippines, we've got them boxed in, and then in Africa, like, they're actually giving Africans a slightly less crappy deal than the Europeans. So it's all, because China is starved for fossil fuel resources. They don't have much oil, coal, or gas, and they got to get it.
So they're not mine. I heard back in the day, my old freaking college professor years and years ago said the Spratly Islands right there in that South China Sea area has more oil than anything. Is that not that?
Well, that's not China's, though. That's the problem for them.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're building those bases and supposedly trying to lock down that area. That's what I'm saying. Like, long term, are they trying to lock it down?
Remember, like 4 years ago, it was all about Senkaku and Takashima and all these. Like, they didn't get any of those either. They were fighting with Japan about those islands. They're fighting with Taiwan. They're fighting with Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam. Like, China has been really stupid with the Spratly because they turned all of Indochina against them. Like, which was hard to do. I mean, Indochina is not a big fan of.
I thought that's what that whole ASEAN kind of thing was about, that Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and then China had their own little version of it. I thought that's kind of what they were trying to do to lock that region down through like trade agreements.
China's been such a bully that a lot, like Vietnam is very close to Japan right now. Japan is the biggest Asian resistance to China, like in their neighborhood, the strongest country. And they're not going to allow it. And the United States is out. Like, this is one side. Like, you think the U.S. is bad? It could get a lot worse if you put the Chinese on top. We see how they abuse their own people even. And they are building fake islands in Spratly, and they're declaring this island's ours and that island's ours. But what I've noticed is, like, with Takashima and Senkaku and stuff, they would then, like, they'll do that for like 3 or 4 years, and then it disappears and it's on to the next one. And it's just a lot of saber rattling to justify massive naval budgets on both sides for the U.S. and China. They do the same thing with North Korea. They'll lob 1 or 2 missiles into the Sea of Japan, and then suddenly all these contracts come through and more F-35s and so on to Okinawa, and then suddenly conflict goes away.
China's also being very smart, though, in my mind, by loaning out massive amounts of money to nations, and then as payment with interest, they take their ports from them.
And they're taking their ports, and they're getting Haifa right now. Like, Israel's offering China Haifa, and China needs that. They need that.
Just to explain to our lay listeners, what is Haifa?
It's a port in Israel. It's very important because
I love how you said that. You go, it's a port in Israel.
Like, the importance of why the only way to get from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean is either the Suez Canal or via pipeline through Israel. That's it. Libya, especially, that's not option. Egypt, not option. So the lines, of course, Libya is not adjacent to the Red Sea, but I'm talking about the pipelines. Those are all debunked. So all you got is the Suez, which is an expensive middleman, or the Israelis. And if they had Haifa on the Med, you have a Chinese presence on the Mediterranean. which they really, really need. If you don't have ports, you really don't have any means of transporting things like oil and gas other than by line or the super expensive way by like a caravan of tanker trucks or something.
Well, doesn't the Chinese, don't they run the Panama Canal in like a huge port in Long Beach or something?
Yeah, they paid for it. Yeah. The China goes after what's called the maritime choking points. So the Suez, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of the Black Sea, the Aden Strait, the Panama Canal. There's 6 major choking points to the shipping lanes in the sea. And China is trying to buy its way in. But people are like, oh, it's going to be the biggest influence of China. But the way I see it is global trade isn't a bad thing. Like, Africans are actually getting out of poverty because of Chinese infrastructure. It's a win-win. Like, China doesn't steal those resources, they buy them. And it helps bring those nations up.
Not 100% true. Not 100% true.
Hold on, Patrick. What you got to say about what's up, Pat?
No, I'm just saying not 100% true. I mean, we know that China has funded and armed terrorist organizations to, go across borders and destroy nations and things like that. I mean, they helped put Mugabe in power. They were just, butchering white farmers left, right?
They attacked Rhodesia. Well, Rhodesia and Cecil Rhodes and all that. Rhodesia had more of an organic domestic corruption in Africa there when they were killing white farmers in Rhodesia, long before South Africa even, which is all the rage right now. That's still happening, by the way.
Big time.
They're murdering black farmers too. They're and the thing is, they color it with all this racial stuff, which is not baloney. There's sincere racism there, but ultimately, it's political factions are attacking landowners and redistributing it amongst its loyalists. But if you attack farmers, regardless of what color they are, and you don't replace them with other farmers, all you're going to end up with is mass shortages.
Right. I mean, that's like handing 500 acres over to me. I've never farmed in my life. I've got like 7 tomato plants in my backyard. So give me 500 acres. Give me 500 acres. You're gonna have the worst fucking corn crop.
If all you do is
it's because you're Croatian, damn it. It's because you're Croatian.
All you do is put like seeds in the sand or whatever. It doesn't like to have business to scale is a very scientific, high skilled labor skill. You can't just you'll grow some food if you just put it in the dirt and water it or whatever, like your tomatoes in your yard. But if you do that to scale, you end up with a massive shortage. And people think, farming, this is how easy. You just, you plant some stuff and you wait. Well, not really.
Until your tractor breaks down and you don't know how to fix it. You have to be an engineer, a mechanic. You have to know, you have to know the soil. You have to be a meteorologist. You have to be a lot of things to be a farmer.
Yeah,
exactly. To farm, okay, you can farm enough to feed yourself and all that, but if you're going to have a surplus enough to feed the rest of
commercial farming, yeah.
Talking about commercial farming, when you're feeding millions, you need GM. You need a lot of skill, a lot of technical know-how, and it's across several different industries to be able to do this to the scale needed. And they're just getting rid of these people and redistributing the land to whoever, and they're also putting cash crops where food crops ought to be. So they're growing, rubber or tobacco or whatever, and guess what? You can't eat that, and they're going to have shortages. And it's this horrible thing in South Africa, because when you talk about the murder of these farmers and the redistribution of land to loyalists, the racial component of it is so sensitive that they're going, oh, yeah, well, didn't whites do all these bad things to black in South Africa? I'm like, yeah, how does that justify murdering farmers? It doesn't. But if you come out on that side, there's so many of these white nationalist types that for motivated for other reasons, they're just on Team Whitey or whatever, that they say the same thing. And it's like, guess what? In this particular instance, they're right. You can't go murder farmers, whether it's racially motivated or any other motivation. You can't just go murder people.
There's a lot of gas. I understand the anger though out of the South Africans.
I absolutely understand anger I get the whole picture. I understand why blacks are mad and why whites are mad. But the thing is, specifically, they've been murdering farmers. They've been murdering farmers in the adjacent area. Like you mentioned, Rhodesia. This started in the 90s. They were killing farmers in Rhodesia. And look what happened.
Right.
They ended up with right? So it's going to happen, even as advanced as South Africa is, which is more than landlocked countries in Rhodesia or anything, but they will pay the price down the line. And a lot of farmers are leaving too. Like, if you're going to have the degree of racism where you're just going to be like, well, I mean, it's not legal or anything. Like, you do, if they get caught trying to do that, they will get arrested or shot or whatever. But there have been government officials that have praised these acts of terrorism and somehow justifying it with, well, you had an apartheid for so long. Well, two rights don't make a wrong. You don't reverse you don't just have a different apartheid on a different team. How is that any different? It's not. But there's a lot of shit libs that will not stick up for white South Africans because in the past, South Africans were racist, so they don't want to be associated with that. And just like someone calling them a name is enough to shut it down, even though families are being burned alive and butchered. It's insane.
On a ridiculous...
In former Rhodesia, I mean, they're literally begging the white farmers to come back because they can't grow anything. I mean, their country obviously imploded with a million dollars over there is equal to $1 American dollar. It's, the inflation, everything else. So they've learned their lesson there, but in South Africa they haven't learned it yet.
Well, it's common, and the other thing is, like, a lot of the originally the black farmers, of course Africans been farming for centuries too, but they migrate elsewhere, and a lot of it's because under these do-gooder foreign aid policies where they'll come in with the ANC and the rest of them, and they'll give away food. You're taking away agency, because, like, imagine if you had a shoe store and I come next to you and just give away shoes. How long are you going to stay in the shoe business?
Right.
You're not.
Yeah.
And if I'm giving away food and cash crops, etc., how are those farmers supposed to make a living and make enough money? They're going to get out of that. And this is on purpose. They don't want them selling food. They're like, well, grow flowers instead, and we'll make vegetable oil or whatever. Like, they don't want them making food. If you have food and water, you got them by the shorties. And a lot of the domestic African agriculture was destroyed, whether it was intentional or not. But these UN food programs and a lot of this aid and welfare actually wiped out African agency. And then they end up selling the land, and it usually goes to some European company on 99-year leases, and they flip it over and start digging for copper or whatever they want, doing anything other than growing food. And then with white farmers, they're like, oh no, they're not doing it to us because they're part of the same Dutch companies and stuff usually. But we're talking about way back when, but the only ones that retain the know-how, because a lot of the Africans have migrated out. And so the colonists come in and they bring their tech with them and they're farming, and then they're getting physically pushed off, and you end up with them exactly like having to beg them to return because the remainder, they've lost that skill, and you don't have time to, you miss 1 year, you starve, right? And this happened in Northern Africa too. Like in Ethiopia, they had a sustained program of the churches and government industry and everything. You can adopt a kid and give them food, and it sounded all great. It wiped out their agriculture, and they had 2.5 million people starved to death in 2006 and 7. Like, that's in the modern times.
Right.
And welfare kills. I mean, that should be the lesson there. It's like, teach people how to grow food, don't just give them food.
We even talked about how odd it sounds compared to that comparison. It's people are getting sanctioned and fined for collecting rainwater. This frowning upon self-sufficiency globally appears to be systemic.
And the level of corruption in a lot of African governments. There are more regulations and higher taxes in Africa than anywhere in the world. Like, if you want to try to start up a business, forget about it. And they think, well, it's this liberal fantasies like this where they have their playground. Let's have really high taxes and then have the government redistribute stuff to the populace. Well, of course they don't. They just redistribute to their own little cliques at the expense of the populace.
Yes.
And it's just, more starvation and depravity, except for the coastal cities. They look like any other coastal city. They're thriving, skyscrapers and doing business on the trade. But as you go inland, it falls apart completely. But the coastal is international. That's why. It's almost unfixable. And because when you oppose foreign aid, when you're trying to be like, let's stop giving food to Africans, people think you're the most horrible person in the world. But you got to explain that, well, in the long run, like, yeah, in immediate cases, send food aid, but that's not what we actually do. We're sending food with conditions. And you never get to that point in the argument to start explaining the specifics of that and how a lot of it's not even given, it's loaned. They'll get a giant loan from the IMF to buy food that was exported from Africa, sold back to Africa through a loan that is predatory lending to drive them in debt on purpose.
Right.
So that they have to sell. What do they have? What has intrinsic value? Assets, right? They have to sell their what? Their land in order to pay off the loan.
Well, this is the very same dynamic like John Perkins talks about in like Diary of an Economic Hitman and how they implode countries through these IMF loans, etc. It's crazy.
So they have to go into debt to buy back food that was exported from their own country, and the only way they have two ways of paying off the debt: rapid inflation or selling off land. They sell off land, and what happens? That land doesn't go to food crops; it goes to cash crops and other finding metals and minerals and so on.
Yeah, big holes in the ground.
Digging big holes. Look at Zambia; it's a giant copper mine. I mean, if you look at it on the map, it's just a big copper mine, and but China is interested in getting fossil fuels, and they're not. They need that so desperately, and the distance is enough that they need the ports, etc., that they're willing to give the Africans a slightly less bad deal, not a good deal, than the Europeans. That competition has been good for Africans, but don't be delusional. China doesn't care. They just know they got to get offered something a little bit better than the competitors. But most of these African states, like, gosh, they're just catching it from both sides. They're caught in a big tug of war between the West and China. They're getting a bad deal from both. And the domestic corruption, because a lot of the leaders, is like John Perkins said, you want the wallet or the gun. You get that deal, right? And they pick the wallet.
I mean, and that's really part of that real time dynamic is playing out like right before us. Like this shit. I don't know. Is it moving towards the shift towards Eurasia, towards China, towards Russia?
Not to interrupt. You can't forget Canada. Canada gets forgotten in all of this, and the pillaging they're doing in Africa and the mining. I mean, they're sucking like $32 billion a year in mining assets out of Africa as a whole. They're all over the country, and so don't let Trudeau's country go for the waste in this discussion.
Canada is very much in minerals and jewels, and they're every bit as guilty as a lot of these. But
and all those people out there that love their electric cars with those lithium batteries, remember the slave labor of the little kids over there in the African mines that are digging that shit out of the ground.
Yeah, we don't want to think about that part. No.
There's a lot of metals. I'm glad Japan found that cache of rare earth metals, but they've been digging around not for rare earth, but just rare metals out of Africa, and Canada is very much part of it. The biggest culprit, though, is this commodities company called Glencore. And, it's your neutral Swiss, right? And it was a Mark Rich company. He's in the ground now, but this is a guy he worked for
Mark
Mossad.
Rich, one of Clinton's guys, right?
Well, Clinton gave him a pardon.
Yeah.
And Denise Rich financed Hillary's Senate run. While her husband or ex-husband was on Interpol's Most Wanted.
Go figure.
Yeah. Then there's the New Square scandal. That's another story. But there are a lot of liberals that they don't see this whole John Perkins scenario happening in Africa. They honestly think the reason Africa's poor is, we can't say this, but Africans they're just too dumb. They can't do it themselves.
Right, of course.
And that's why we have to go in and give them loans and help them because they can't do it themselves. It's the racism of low expectations,
And the racism of lower expectations, ladies and gentlemen.
They honestly think like, oh, these black people, they can't do it. They don't know how to do this and that. And like, yes, they do. And we're doing it before you got there. But it's You can destroy any. You can do an economic jackal style takedown of wherever. It doesn't matter what color they are. You see it in Latin America. You see it
It's
in
everywhere.
Asia.
Yeah, hell yeah.
You see it in Eastern Europe. You see wherever. It doesn't matter. Like that whole biological deterministic stuff like bothers me. I just had an argument with people. I'm
Well,
like,
that
you know,
even
you
played
get-
into the whole arrest of Assange,
Right.
supposedly. That the country of Ecuador supposedly had just acquired a $4-point-something billion loan from the IMF, which facilitated the handing over of Assange. I don't know if I haven't.
Well, yeah, that's why I said that on Red Elephants the other day. But I think Daniel McAdams and the Ron Paul Institute were talking about that too. But now it's come out that, like, yeah, that was a bribe. Like that was conditional for Assange. So that wasn't like, oh, look at this coincidence that everybody knows what it is. Like they're not even hiding it now. And also,
That's why I say the globalists have kicked into high gear. They're desperate. They're doing anything they can and being obvious and don't give a shit because they know they're on the ropes right now.
you know what though? They're overplaying their hand.
Oh yeah.
Now, does
I think
this
so,
and
too.
I've
They
seen
were
I've
overplaying their hands before the election.
for like you just said, all the percentage of like there's like no way Trump will win. What are your thoughts? And I've heard this conversation, and Pat and I have had this conversation. We've talked about it since this certain side of this chess game is losing. The likelihood of false flags, like of any type, like even today, what we saw in Notre Dame. Well, whatever. What are your thoughts on that? Since this,
False flags get bigger.
Well, the more desperate they get and the sloppier they get. This is every time there is pressure like Syria's about to win territory, they go, oh look, let's have the white helmet stage another gas attack, and then we'll go in there.
Yeah, they're completely.
Like, they need you to look like they gotta get something. Like when Russiagate fell through with Mueller, they had to bring it back somehow, so they go after Assange. But that's just an even bigger mistake, because what if he comes home and says, yeah, it was Seth Rich. Now what?
That's what's going to happen, man. I'm telling you.
Well,
It's
if that
coming.
happens, what do they got to do? They got to start a war or blow up a building. They got to have something big.
Notre Dame Cathedral catches on fire. Al-Aqsa Mosque catches on fire. It's all
I didn't even know about the Al-Aqsa.
the timing. Yeah.
Man, that was something that I've discussed before too. Is like they're gonna have to, in tandem. Well, not have to, but what probably would do in tandem with the mosque is they'd have to hit a prominent Christian area as well. And one
I
of
think
those
that there are
is definitely-
massive attacks coming in Europe that will.
Well, this is Easter. This is about to roll into Easter weekend too, so you cannot forget
It's
that.
going to be ugly,
religious
man.
prominence.
It's going to be ugly. There's been intelligence uncovered that there are huge attacks planned. I'm talking nothing we've ever seen before level stuff that's coming. So be prepared.
What happened in New Zealand, and I'm kind of tiptoe on this because this will get you yanked off YouTube and everything else because you're not allowed to talk about New Zealand apparently. But
Or Nipsey Hussle.
that
Really.
incident is going to serve for a lot of Muslims that watch that happen are angry, and it's
Right.
easy to recruit these kind of young kids, and you needed something like that to happen, or you could just be taking advantage of a crisis. Either way you want to look at it,
Well,
but
that's the thing.
regardless, the result's
I
going to
mean,
be the same.
We're
You're going to have
people, Ryan. We're people who have dug into this stuff for a long time, and we have to at least mention to people who, no matter what religion you are, you've got to at least entertain what we're talking about and how this is being facilitated and fabricated out of thin air. Of course, the deliberate pitting of religions against each other is a massive undertaking by the media and the globalists that have been doing this for a long time. And what I would say to anyone who's a Muslim out there, or anyone who's an angry, on either side, a Christian, a Jew, anything like that, with a level head, saying, man, here's the thing that they want us to do. They want me as a law-abiding citizen to get pissed off and pick up my guns and go kill some innocent Muslims. And that's the worst thing that we can do right now. And that's the thing that I'm trying to remind everybody of is, listen, man, you got to let things play out here with what Trump's doing, whether you like him or not. He's going after some very, very, very evil, very bad people in my mind. And Jeff believes that it's one gang family taking out another gang family. Look, in my mind, and as Ryan mentioned, I'm okay with this gang family that's taken over. Right now I'm okay with it because they did defund the programs that were funding ISIS. They did stop that bullshit. So you got to say to yourself, if you're on the Muslim side of the coin, saying, all right, listen, they actually defunded a psychotic movement in Syria. Assad's he's not an angel, but it's a hell of a lot better than ISIS taking over. So people need to have cooler, calmer heads. And I've got, a lot of friends. I'm telling you right now, I've got a lot of friends, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of veterans, and many of whom are former Tier 1 level guys who are former SEALs, former Rangers, former Delta. These guys, when they talk about, blue helmets coming into the country, or martial law being put in place in the United States and National Guard being distributed everywhere to control the crowd, when these guys talk, they're like, do you realize I could take out an entire unit of National Guard by myself? I mean, they're not even remotely joking around or stretching, so this is how scary these guys are. We do not want this to kick off, because once it kicks off, you don't want these boys pissed off. We just don't want it to happen.
Well, it does seem like they would plan false flags across Europe. It's the softest target.
Right.
And
false flags here.
Well, that's what's been going on big in Europe.
The end game is get the guns, period. They've got to get the guns. If they don't get the guns from the Americans, they can never totally take over, right?
Well, that's why it's harder to pull off in the U.S. You need to instantly blow up a building or something, because people do have guns.
They want a guy like me to pick up my guns and go kill some innocent Muslims who didn't do anything to me. They want to freak everybody out with false flags and cause this clash of civilizations on purpose.
You guys know about the Frankfurt School?
Absolutely. We did a show on that, actually.
Good. And that's, they turn in men against women,
let's talk about
gay
that,
against straight.
Let's talk about the Frankfurt School, because most even current day educators who have been brainwashed into that line of thought have no idea about the history of where it came from. They have no idea. They think it's the correct way to think, but they have no idea why it even started and where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about those speeches that happened in the United States. Let's talk about the changing of the minds of our educators and that poison, that toxin that got with.
And that was the target of this, malignant philosophy. Was our universities.
Right.
They knew if you could get the universities are kind of predicate what mass media narrative's going to be.
That's the poison that has now led to, at an American university where Candace Owens is going to speak, and she's trying to get, just these black college students to go and listen to her speak, because these kids are getting co-opted by white liberals who are fucking off their rocker, insane.
Keeping them on the plantation.
These Antifa freaks who are losing their minds, and they're screaming that Candace Owens is a racist, and because she somehow supports the constitutional way of thinking, that she is now an Uncle Tom, or Tomasita, if you want to call her, and she's sitting there trying to have this conversation with these young black students in the park. And she's literally, this crowd of Antifa is ready to attack her.
And they don't want them to speak, and she's having to get right up next to them and talk in their ear, because these Antifa weirdos are playing these horns as just noisemakers. You couldn't get any closer to acting like monkeys. They're just sitting there making noise.
Did you see her dismantle that lady, the white liberal news anchor on TV?
Yes, and I saw the hearing that they had.
She went after
the alleged rise of white nationalism. Where? What are you talking about?
What I say. All this is this is their ploy to make all white people embarrassed to be a constitutionalist and support the United States of America, is what it is. And I just throw it right back in their face and tell them to piss off, because it's an obvious. You have to be a complete. I'm just going to say it, because the word retard has been redefined. That doesn't mean you're mentally handicapped. That means you have all your faculties and you're an idiot, right? Yeah. So these people are trying to use the term white nationalist, and I just look at people and I go, Look, I'm a nationalist, and I happen to be white. Okay,
Yeah,
there's a lot of
that's not-
nationalists.
That's
who
not
happen to be black.
ethno-nationalism,
There's a lot
though.
of nationalists who happen to be Latino. Okay, I'm a nationalist who happens to be white, and if you want to call me a white nationalist, go ahead. But there's 5,000 Ku Klux Klan members left in this country, and it's shrinking all the time. These people are so desperate. It's disgusting.
Oh yeah, I mean, if someone uses the N-word like Nazi, the person who gets accused of being a Nazi loses their job. If you use the other N-word, the person using that word loses their job. I mean, it's definitely not a rise of white nationalism. Yeah. So they say this to try to get different factions to fight with each other. They want it's the Frankfurt School. They want blacks and whites to fight, gays and straight to fight, men and women to fight.
Exactly.
And I even say boomer millennials to fight. Like they're even trying to get different age groups to conflict with each other. That's a new one. That didn't really prominently exist until a few years ago, right? It wasn't.
Do you think in any way, shape, form, or fashion, because we've all talked about it, are they doing this? Are they firing away on all these different cylinders of, race, politics, religion, to create some kind of civil unrest, civil war part two? I know that.
You know what?
I hate to throw that
beast
term
goes
out
down
there.
with a bang, not a whimper.
What's that?
I said the beast goes down with a bang, not a whimper. They're desperate, and they're flailing out in every direction. And a lot of it, that's why a lot of people are calling it clown world or whatever, because it's getting so ridiculous when you're calling Candace Owens a white supremacist or whatever.
It's insane. Man. These people are
it reminds me of what Kanye West, the flack he got. I mean, Kanye West clearly has whatever issues. I mean, he's still, I like his music or whatever. But when he was talking about kind of the mental disengagement from this program that's been set up to keep, this thought process of keeping black folks always Democrat and not even trying to hear any kind of anything from the other side, because otherwise, like Pat said, you're a sellout, et cetera, et cetera. It's like it's so intellectually
whitewashed. Yeah,
it's not even, no one even wants to try to think. They want the shortcuts to thinking.
The left, the cry bullies, like I like to call them, the cry bullies, they use a bully tactic and they try to rope everyone into identitarian politics. So like, oh, you're this biological group, so you have to think like this. And it amazes me, I said this in Sam's show too, but when someone says the black community, blah, 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 and I'm just thinking, really? All of them? Like,
yeah, exactly. Or the LGBT community or whatever.
Jeff is obviously middle of the road because, he's half and half, Right, Jeff?
I'm a human being first, Pat. Why are you so preoccupied with my goddamn race?
All white people are, of course, GOP, and all black people are, of course, Democrats. I mean, it just makes perfect sense.
But it leads to the whole larger discussion. You need to divide people on those levels. The moment you start, we're all just kind of human beings, as we see in these situations of crisis, et cetera, big floods. You don't see just GOP people trying to get people out of flooded situations or whatever. We tend to transcend that.
There are a lot of identitarians.
I'm so disgusted though by to look at it and just try to compute it in my brain when I see white people holding up signs that say like exterminate white people, like and whiteness, and all this, and it's like, dude, come on. We were kind of born this way. We really didn't.
Well, but it's an extension of what you were saying, Ryan. It's all about group stuff, man. And it's the weird thing is, it's like the last thing you get judged as an individual human being that just happens to be XYZ. You're no longer an individual. If you say or whatever, you're a part of this huge group, and that's the best way to play us off against each other. And it's been wickedly brilliant.
It's the kind of horseshoe thing because the very few, I don't want to point out, like racist there are, and also the militantly anti-racist are usually also racist because they're racist to whites, and that's racism too. But they all think collectively. They're identitarian, whether they attribute atrocity to race or accomplishment to race. Whereas a lot of, the classic racist line is, Europe has a disproportionate amount of innovation in this and that, or in technology and science and something. I'm like, no. Free markets are conducive to innovation, not biology. Like the exact same area doesn't do as well under a different system. Or look at North and South Korea. You got a biologically the same language, and it's night and day as far as accomplishment goes. And the other side will blame atrocity on biology. So let's say whites made slavery, or whites killed the Indians, or whites did that. I'm like, this is not some part of whiteness. The Irish didn't do it.
Jeff,
it's part of government. Right?
Jeff, you and I need to make a music video, dude. And it's going to be on the Dr. Pepper commercial theme. It's going to go something like, I'm a racist, you're a racist, he's a racist, she's a racist. Wouldn't you like to be a racist, too?
I would so much rather do a reenactment of the Sneetches, dude. Do you remember the Sneetches? Were the Sneetches? They were all Sneetches. The Dr. Seuss story. They were all Sneetches, but one had stars and one didn't have stars. And the one with stars like totally clown. The other one's like, "You starless motherfucker, get away from me." And then this dude came in who like paid people to like, "Hey man, if you just give me some money, I'll help you get a star." And then it became this weird cycle of everyone off and on star until they didn't have any money. And then they realized, like, we're all just Sneetches, motherfucker.
The Gulliver's Travels. Well, we open the egg on this side. Well, we do it on the other side, you weirdo. They fight each other. But it works. Like in the Middle East, they use religion, and in the West, they'll use race.
It's everywhere. Why is it so effective? Why is that? Is that something just inherent to human beings? Like, of course, we were kind of tribal, et cetera, but why have we allowed so hardcore? How is extreme tribalism so effective now? Why have we allowed our tribe to define our
media?
It's the press. I think it doesn't work as well as you assume. It just appears to, because that's what gets the camera. Like almost everyone I know is not racist and also doesn't hate whites either. It's just this weird faction of maybe like 40 Antifa. They usually have to bus them in from other cities to make it look like a presence, you know, who are all saying kill whitey, this and that. And then the other side of people of like white separatists and all, they're so few in number, you know their names, you know. So it's like, and I'm not going to say their names. I'm not going to give any, you know, props to that crowd either. But like, it's just silly. It's clown world. Like the bulk of the nation is, it doesn't fall for that. But they're trying as hard as they can to make it appear like that. Like my friends were just in New Zealand and they were asking us like, you know, what, you know, if you're a black person in America, are you just like afraid cops are going to shoot you at any moment and stuff? Because that's how the press makes America look.
Right.
Like, no, you go to school together, play sports together. It's not, no one's like.
That's not to say every cop is officer friendly, but exactly.
Oh, no.
The narrative is.
Some cops will shoot whoever, but like, you know, generally it's not like a daily thing where, you know, there's racial crime all the time everywhere or something. The Klans around every corner. But that's what the press makes it look like. I had a friend from Australia in LA. He's like, hey, and he was wearing a keffiyeh, and he's like, what happened if I wore this like on Venice? I'm like, nothing. Like no one would even care or notice or probably even know what it is.
Right.
But in their mind, they think like, oh, we all hate Muslims and black people fear for their lives. I'm like, no, that's not America. Like that's that's Hollywood.
Yeah, a friend of mine was just, I can't remember whether they were Guatemala or something. They visited down there, and they said that everywhere they went, the people that lived there were asking, and they were saying things like, "Black people actually have jobs in America?" Like they,
Lord,
it's
sweet
weird.
Mary and Joseph.
But that's how the media plays America's. Like,
I mean, honestly, when you, I mean,
that's how college kids are. Like, people have never been gotten a real job, like trust fund babies and stuff.
Sure.
Like, they live in such a bubble that they're also just watching on TV and stuff, and they're as ignorant as the person from New Zealand or Guatemala, or whatever, that thinks like
Hollywood. They live in a bubble
all the time.
Hollywood lives in a bubble.
Because I'm from the South, so they're like, oh my God, you're from North Carolina? I'm like, yes. And they're like, oh, so do you hate niggers and stuff? And like, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, no. And it isn't like that. They're like, well, it's the South, right? So y'all like really hate gays and this and that. I'm like, no, not at all. It's not like that at all. Have you been there? But that's what they see in Hollywood, you know? Like, so even worse than just the United States getting that reputation, the southern part of the United States is like, wow, it's just people walking around with guns on their hips and cowboy hats and stuff, or, you know, So I'm like, no, I've never seen that. But,
I mean, it's so weird. If we could transcend all that bullshit, we say it all the time on the show, man, and we just see it normally. Like I said, so much of this is so contrived. We have so much more than we have in common than we do different, man. If you were to get people who think they would like, no, I don't want to go over there. If you were to just get them together for a barbecue, pop a beer, just hang out or whatever, just chat. I mean, everyone wants to protect their kids. Everyone wants to just like live a good, fruitful life. I mean,
I had friends from Los Angeles, which is not like the boonies or anything. I had friends from Los Angeles. They went to Mississippi to shoot a film. I think they went to Jacksonville or something. And I was like, how was it? And they're like, it was like a real city. I was like, of course. What did you think it was going to be like? Tumbleweeds and the hillbillies playing the banjo or something? I'm like,
right.
Yes, Mississippi has cities, yes. And they have Starbucks and all the same stuff, that you find in LA.
I've got a couple.
They were shocked.
I've got a couple things to add to that. Well, first off, Jim Acosta just won Truth to Power award for his honest media.
Sweet Mary and Joseph.
And then listen to this. This is a friend of mine who has been an actor and a stunt person for a long time. He was also a mixed martial arts fighter and also a professional wrestler. He's a great guy. He goes, "You're going to love this story of diversity and PC fuckwits shooting themselves in the foot." He goes, black buddy of mine who has a family to feed recently booked a lucrative stunt actor gig on a new, I'm not going to say the show, which is produced, hosted by director, producer, I'm not going to say the name, it's a big name, a known vocal and aggressive diversity advocate, especially for the black community. But on the night before the shoot, I get a panicked call to check my availability for the same role as my buddy has been ousted at the very last minute. Turns out that a member of the production team asked the stunt coordinator the question of who was playing the character of, I'm not going to say the name, who carjacks the show's white protagonist. When he found out my buddy was black, he said, "Oh no, he's African American. This won't do." So in the name of political correctness and not portraying a black guy as a carjacker, they took thousands of dollars. They took thousands of dollars out of my friend's pocket, the black family man, and gave it to my white lily ass. He goes, in the words of a successful black actor I told this story to, "This is what happens when white people try to protect black people without asking black people first." He goes, "People of all colors are so up their own asses, it's mind-blowing." That's what's going on in this world. Hollywood.
That's Hollywood. And Hollywood is that little Silicon Valley bubble is ultra liberal, and they don't notice that. Like, they don't, like, oh, you know what? That guy's not going to get paid now because you don't want this particular scene to come off this way, whatever, because you're afraid of each other pointing fingers at one another, going, you got a black guy jacking a car? What do you say? All black people jack cars or something? I'm like, oh, get over it. It's a carjacking. It's fake. It's fiction anyway, so whatever. And yeah, sometimes black people do jack cars, so whatever. Just have them jack the car.
And if you cast it as a white person, like, man, why don't you just cast it how you really is? Fucking brothers be jacking cars and shit.
I don't know the stats on jacking cars, but all they did is take money out of somebody's pocket. That's all they did.
Yeah, so that's.
And it's like, oh, we want to portray the white guy jacking a car. So like, why? Oh, so whatever.
It's interesting.
I don't know. Maybe he was a redhead. I don't know.
All right.
Political correctness.
Listen, we have kept you a minute, but we cannot let you slide. All right, so we have to let everybody know, if we didn't let you know earlier, my man Ryan is in Japan. And what was it, 2011? It was a long time ago. There was a huge earthquake and tsunami that hit. And the
March 11th, 2011.
Yeah, there you go, right there. And so there's been all this conjecture on what actually has occurred from these supposed leakages from these Fukushima Daiichi facilities. What's going on? Has it tainted completely the Pacific Ocean? What the hell's going on over there, dude?
Yeah, I've heard all the stories. And another guy that lives in Japan, James Corbett, and myself did a big debunking on Fukushima.
Yes. Shout out to the Corbett. What's up, brother?
Yep. We did a... That's not on YouTube anymore because I have 2 strikes on YouTube, so I have all, like, 90% of my videos are private, but after May 22nd, it'll be re-released. But
that's a way. Good, that a boy.
I just put them all private. I'm like, yeah, I'll just private all my videos so they can't, SPLC can't mess with me for a while. But all these stories came out in Melonhead, and a lot of them promoted this junk, saying it's worse than Chernobyl, and there's radiation going to California. And they took a wave map, an Australian meteorological map of the waves, like a water, because it was a tsunami, and said it was radiation. I'm like, isn't it interesting that all these colors stop wherever there's land? Because there's no water, there's no wave. They changed wave and wrote radiation on it, and then all the kook sites ran with that. It was not a radiation map, and there's no radiation reaching California. Some idiot YouTuber was standing on thorium and got a higher reading than he thought, and assumed, well, this must be radiation from Japan, and they all ran with that like Chicken Little.
So what's going on at the actual facility, though? Like, is that thing locked down, or is that? I mean, it's been years, but
yeah, they've had to clean up Fukushima itself, of course. I mean, they had that whole. You have to understand.
What's the level of contamination in that area?
Over 20,000 people died from a tidal wave. That's the real tragedy, and so did farm animals and everything else. And then to be cautious, of course, there was no fission reaction, so it wasn't like Chernobyl that blew up and scattered radioactive material all over Russia.
Okay.
What happened was some of these spent fuel rods, which were stupidly housed right above because of TEPCO, got cracked. And so that was leaking. And so what they did was, you have to cool these down, and there's really no other way than massive amounts of water. So they were putting some of this radioactive water in the ocean. But you got to understand the parts per million that we're talking about. They're like, you put radioactive water in the ocean, all the fish are going to die. I'm like, no, they're putting so little in per day. It's like, I think it was 756,000 bananas or something. That would be like the equivalent of what was going in. It's not creating three-eyed fish or any of that. There isn't radiation in California. There's not even radiation in Tokyo. And I put out $1,000 challenge to people and offered to pay for their flight if they came over here with their own Geiger counter and found levels of radiation. And a guy from Germany actually did it. Went to Tokyo, went to Osaka, had dinner with him. Of course, he didn't find anything because there isn't anything. And before somebody spazzes out and goes, that's because the government's covering it up. You can't. You physically can't cover up radiation. It's made out of light.
Right.
Everything. It isn't there because it isn't fucking there. Like, there is no radiation. They're not faking the readings, whatever. You can come over and do it yourself. It's not leaking radiation. They had a problem, but it's not like the way the doomsdayer cults, the fear porn channels wanted to turn Fukushima into this huge ordeal so they could sell iodine and nuclear prepper gear and all the rest.
Sell iodine.
Alex Jones was right away. He's like, well, you can protect your thyroid. Like
Bone
this.
broth. Limited supply of bone broth, ladies and gentlemen.
The Illuminati, Luciferian lizard people are here with their alien DMT, whatever. And that guy, I mean, he fucking said that. He was like, the Nazis were communicating with alien clockwork elves or whatever using DMT to build secret spaceships.
What are your I know you saw it. What are your thoughts on Alex Jones on
That's
Joe
him throwing
Rogan?
that's him throwing out curveballs so he doesn't get the lawsuit doesn't work on him for that Sandy Hook stuff.
He's going like full retard. So that he's like, well, obviously I'm just out of my mind. No one would believe me, and that'll help him with Sandy Hook. You're right. That's what I think.
Did you saw him on Joe?
Says really outlandish shit because he ain't that bright for one, but what he does is he's a disinformation professional. He'll say something without any detail, like Operation Northwoods or Building 7 or something like that, and then in the same breath talk about
isn't that the whole rip with like miss or disinfo cats? I mean, not to say he is because I don't fucking know the guy, but I mean they say like 95% of real shit, and then like 5 to 2.5 or whatever is some weird.
It says opposite, 5% true, 95% bullshit.
Right.
And so what happens is like he'll talk about 9/11 nonstop, and then say Sandy Hook is fake, and then it's like I'll say something about 9/11. They go, "Oh, you think school shootings are fake too?" Because of Alex, like he's created a tar baby out of 9/11. Like, I've done a lot of work on 9/11. We see Empire Mass. I explained what happened, and I didn't have to go into cuckoo land or speculation.
Right.
And that narrative, it's starting to gain some ground, but it's taken 18 years because of the stigma created around 9/11 by Alex Jones. Because all he talks about is physics and stuff. He doesn't get into who did it or why or any of the documentation we have. He just says, Building 7 was announced on BBC before it had fallen, and which is true. And then on top of that, Luciferian globalists, airborne Ebola, Fukushima, There's nothing going on with Fukushima. It's not leaking radiation. Japan's perfectly safe, and I live here, so I'm putting my money where my mouth is. My kids live here.
How far are you from where that happened? Not to say that.
I'm in Osaka, but if it's going to California, it would definitely reach Osaka. I mean, it's just
right.
It's speed of light, so it would have been here instantly. It's not like it matters. It's like, oh, how many miles? We're talking about radiation, right? Well,
yeah. That catches up with you quick.
It's right here, right now. Like, it's faster than you could say it. So, no, it's not. I just had a baby too. Like, we would not live in Japan if I was at 1,000% sure that it was safe.
Yeah, I'm sure Great Mini would have done the mass exodus.
Right, you can physically test it. It just, the fear porn ran with that, and they just figured it's over there. And
anytime you hear radiation in uncontained nuclear reactors, I mean, shit. You don't have to be a radiologist or whatever the term is to have some level of alarm.
There's a once in 1,000 year tidal wave where most earthquakes are side to side. And this was a vertical earthquake where things move up and down. That's what causes tidal waves, and that's what amazingly, Japan is so earthquake proof with its building design that nothing fell. And This was a 10. That they only go up to 7 on the Japanese scale. That'd be a 10 on the Richter scale.
Some of that video though was pretty disturbing, man. Some of that cats just
you can do about. I mean, a big massive water comes. You need superheroes or something. Like, there's nothing. Our current technology.
You want to be out to sea when it hits.
That would be anything better than right.
Is that true? Is that better to be out there? Like,
Absolutely.
At least get over the
Because the wave grows as it gets closer
if you get
to land.
For it, like, any surfer can tell you this too.
For sure.
It doesn't matter how big the bump is. If it's not breaking, you just slowly go up and go back down. But like. Right. The size too, like if it's 33 feet high or 10 feet high, it's not the height of the wave, it's how fast it's moving forward that gives you more of the force.
That's how far it goes more inland. Yeah, for sure.
Land height, it's all going to even out anyway, but it ruined farmland, houses, schools. I saw the saddest thing. I didn't look inside, but there was a school bus, and everybody on there had drowned. Yeah. And there were bodies washing up on the beach like days afterward, just wearing their clothing and all that. I feel like still not over it, like the shit we saw. And
it's crazy.
I had a relative on my wife's side who was a doctor, and he ended up killing himself because he couldn't deal with all the
Yeah. No, it's heavy stuff. Yeah.
It was like, I mean, tens of thousands of people were dead in instant, and then so many were missing. And there was a lot of psychological trauma. People were like, kids died. Like, just whole schools got wiped out. And anyway, everyone knows somebody that was in either Ibaraki or Fukushima, the two areas they hit the most, and the whole nation, like. Nobody looted,
Right.
That didn't happen. Everybody knew how it was so bad. So many people died so quickly, and then it took a long time to reach people who were missing because, there was the electricity was off, and then others were cutting it off on purpose to conserve power and all that. But what really pisses me off about the doomsday people is not only did they detract from the very real tragedy of the tidal wave for this nonsense about radiation hitting California and the starfish are dying, which they quoted from a 2008 article. I'm like, oh, really? Did the radiation go back in time and wipe out the starfish? 3 years before the earthquake. But there was a lot of wasted money in charities and scandals with TEPCO, where they paid like affluent students in New York to come have a 5-star hotel vacation in Japan, where they just went around and they visited a couple of sites. It was a huge just tourism trip for rich kids in America to come over to Japan and play, and then they sing a song or something, and like at a high school, whatever, and say something about Fukushima for about 10 minutes, and then they just went around on a giant tour of Japan, and they went on their own decked out bus that was better than my house, and they stayed at 5-star hotels, and all this money was paid for through under the auspice of Fukushima, and just tons of money got wasted on BS like that. And we were trying to report on it because there were still people sleeping in gymnasiums and stuff, and so much of this money got soaked up because people were like, well, I want to give the charity for Fukushima, it's horrible. But that's exactly when all the leeches come out too, unfortunately. These fucking soulless sons of bitches that use a crisis like Fukushima to pump up their charity, and then they spend it on utter BS that didn't help anybody with Fukushima at all. And that's what should have been focused on, instead of this BS like, radiation wiping out starfish back in time or whatever. Part of the reason the Olympics are coming here is because the stigma was still, don't go to Japan, they're all full of radiation and gonna have cancer and die in a few years. And it's not true. None of it was true.
That's incredible.
And it scared the hell out of me too, because I'm hearing all this reports on English news, and I knew Alex Jones is full of it, but like a lot of people like bit into at least part of it, and so I'm like, do we need to pack up and move right now? I really did all this. And there were water shortages and stuff. There was a bit of a panic,
So when they evacuated that area surrounding Fukushima, what has that land been used for? Anything? Has it been used?
So immediately around the power plant, that is fucked. Like, because you just don't know. Like, there could have been a little bit of material because they did have cracked rods, and it's all going to light up on a detector. It's not that specific. So they just wrote, the whole thing's got a big circle around it, and it's a no-go zone. And they're cleaning the topsoil and stuff just in case. But there's nothing.
So there's somewhat of a Chernobyl effect around it.
There is like a no-go zone, but it isn't like Chernobyl. But
was there any deaths reported from the cats who were working in that facility, that Daiichi facility?
Yeah. What's that, Daiichi?
Was there any deaths reported from any of those guys who had to like recap whatever was going on in there, like whatever leakage was going on, even if it was limited? Was there any?
No, they're sending robots in there anyway.
Oh,
you know that?
So there's been no deaths attributed
Have
to
you seen
radiation.
The Iron? No radiation deaths. Have you seen the? They even drank water from there. Have you seen the?
Wow.
A mayor just got a cup of water and drank it in front of everyone, but. It's just whatever, but they have these Iron Man suits. They're pretty cool. It's
I want one.
Like a person gets in this Gundam-like suit, and the robot moves how you move. But they have these things, and it's like these forklifts for hands, like in Aliens, the movie Aliens, but more like shrunk down. It's not giant like that. It's like an Iron Man thing, and you can lift really. I forget how much, but like way more than a person because of this suit. And it was designed for Fukushima cleanup. You got to look this up on YouTube. It's awesome. There's these white suits, and they get in, and they've got like legs, arms, and everything. You can go just pick up a giant rock or whatever. It's really awesome. But
AI, baby, they're gonna start remembering those movements with AI technology. They're gonna just.
Well, they've been wanting to build a Gundam for a long time, and then they're like, all right, this is to clean up Fukushima. But in the back of their mind, every otaku nerd was like, the Iron Man will be... Oh, yeah, it's just like, we're going to do it. Can we add rockets to the shoes? They're like, no. But they can definitely lift heavy objects, and that's pretty awesome, too. And throw them.
Wow. Technology. Yep. This brave new world we are in. Patrick, we have kept this man long enough, and I know you probably have some things that you need to get to. Anything you want to close with our good friend Ryan Dawson?
No,
Can I get
man,
a- maybe
I
a-
think we've covered a lot, and I'm very thankful for his time. And Ryan, when we close out the show, don't jump off because I wanted to ask you something.
All right, cool. Hey, I
So, Jeff,
appreciate.
you
I
can close.
don't worry about keeping me over time. I love talking about politics.
No, this is
especially
literally not only are you one of the one of the highest rated viewers. There are episodes we have.
Best-
This is the
one of
longest.
highest rated shows.
Highest rated shows. We are. This is the longest one. We're pushing Joe Rogan type stuff right here. We are 2
well, wait
minutes,
till
2 hours
wait
and
till
30
we-
minutes here.
we'll do a show on JFK, and
Oh, no.
you'll get the highest numbers and the longest time.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I we could go there too. We could absolutely go there. I just know it's 11, and I didn't want to keep everybody up. But yeah. Any closing? Anything you guys else want to talk about? I'm with it.
Ryan, how do people track you on social media and websites?
Oh, thanks. So on Twitter, as long as I'm there, it's
Yeah, right.
yeah, these are all temporary. It's Rye Liberty. I'm currently banned on Facebook. Don't even bother with that.
I am so very
Right,
sorry, Pat. Give us a couple
YouTube.
minutes because I do. I'm sorry, Ryan. Talks about
Well,
this. People being deplatformized. You being taken off Facebook. You being losing all that money on Vimeo. Talk to us about these people basically sanctioning truth, if you will. Vaccines.
This was something that CBS recently was pushing under the pretext of censoring Nazis, but of course anyone can get called a Nazi, But I get banned on Facebook. Basically, I get cyclical 30-day bans for whatever. Like I got banned for defending Mark Twain one time. I got banned for booting smiley face with tears. I don't even know what it was.
They just have it out for you doing that.
Wait a
That's
minute,
insane.
what is your address on Twitter?
RY Liberty, like Rye. My name's Rye and Liberty. That's
Okay.
on Twitter. It's pretty fun. I troll pretty hard. And then if you write Ryan Dawson on YouTube, it'll pop up. But just know that
Yeah.
all the most recent videos are there.
Yep. I'm already following you, but
Yeah.
I just wanted everybody to make sure that they got it because I didn't want everybody looking for Ryan Liberty.
Are
Yeah.
we seeing more of that to come? Are we going to be seeing more censorship, more deplatforming, more
Oh, yeah.
like no, we're not stifling your free speech. You just didn't adhere to our guidelines. You know what I mean? These nuances, which technically, I guess they could stand behind it, but ultimately, like Pat talks about, these things are utilities now. They're not just you can't just. What are your thoughts on that? Is this a slippery slope? And
It's
is
how
this-
we-
They gave me 3 strikes in one day on YouTube. But what really pisses me off is Vimeo because I was selling my films there. Can't do that anymore. I was also using that like in combo with Patreon to give them perks. I can't do that anymore. They walked away with $5,000 that I'd already made in sales. And then later I found out because they were telling me one story, and then the side story I got through a fan in New York who was trying to sue him to get his money back for the films he had purchased. Wrote a letter to the attorney general, and then Vimeo wrote them a letter like countering that, and he got to see that copy. And in that, they just call me like anti-Semitic and say the SPLC called me a Holocaust denier and all this crazy stuff.
Southern Poverty
I'm
Law
like,
Center.
wow.
When you say SPLC,
they're
because you said that earlier, Southern
Yeah,
Poverty Law
Southern
Center.
Poverty Law Center. They're just a witch hunting organization that they've gone after Scott Horton, Ron Paul, Glenn Greenwald, like just pick up anyone that's anti-war, and they're like, you're an anti-Semite.
Right, exactly.
And I'm not, obviously, but like that's what they just say. And so YouTube, this is funny. YouTube, 2 of the strikes, I got one of them removed through review. So that's the only reason my channel still exists. They almost wiped out 13 years worth of video. But the 2 strikes that I have right now that don't disappear until May, one is for arguing with white nationalists. The other one is for defending whites because Don Lemon got on CNN and said white people were the greatest threat to America. Let's not demonize people. In the next breath, it's white guys. So whether I'm defending whites from racism towards them or defending minorities for racism towards them, either way you get a strike. So the robots or whatever, they don't get any nuance. Like I was being anti-racist in both positions. I don't agree with censoring anybody for anything. I think the whole idea of free speech is protecting the unpopular stuff, and I think sunshine's the best policy. I'd rather have debate,
For
but
sure.
they won't allow it. So I've changed a lot of people's minds, like racist people. I'm like, well, I just talk to them, and then they.
Dude, that's a huge point you just made, man. Just rather have debate. We say that all the time, man. Let's just exchange ideas. We don't necessarily have to agree all the time, but don't like elite criminalize or whatever, our disagreement, or make it so we, marriage is breaking up, relationships is breaking up, etc. It's like, it's pretty absurd.
It's a slippery slope too, because under the pretext of fighting the Nazis or whatever, they're just going to censor whatever they feel like. We all know this. I mean, they'll just say, "Oh, yeah."
Well, I see people on Facebook
Trump.
Yeah.
Barry White said red hat is the new white hood, except she didn't have the balls to say it. She just did that. Some people say.
Who said that?
What, MSNBC. Barry White to the New York Times. She was on with Joe Rogan and said some people think the red hat's the new white hood. I'm like, no, Barry, you think the red hat's the white hood. Just say it. Don't say something. Say. What my favorite is MSNBC. They always say many people are saying. And that's like back when Fox News was like all pro-war during the Iraq War. They'd always say, some people say, blah, blah, blah,
undisclosed blah, blah. White House sources, undisclosed Pentagon sources say, like, really?
Like, just say John. Come on. It's like, just say it's him. I always wonder if John McCain was reincarnated as John Bolton's mustache as a parasite.
How dare you disparage a war veteran?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should apologize to Al Qaeda for knocking their man.
Right.
Max Kaiser said, I'll never forgive Vietnam for allowing John McCain to return 5 times. But he was a war hero. He did a lot for the Viet Cong.
Jesus Lord.
That lovely fire on the ship was,
Hey, he was a great songbird. Yeah, he set fire his own boat.
It's amazing thing that historical.
Help cover up the Liberty. They gave him a 1 week to do investigation. That whole family is like Daniel McAdams had this funny tweet because Meghan McCain, the whale. I'm all for sending her free Happy Meals because she's about 2 cheeseburgers away from a heart attack. She got up there and said, "I hope Julian Assange rots in hell."
Right, I saw that.
Fairbanks replied and said, "Why is your father lonely?" And it was like, "Ooh, shots fired!" Like, and then there's so many. That thread is just delicious because there's so many people. Just somebody.
How dare she? How dare she be so self-righteous and say such a thing? How dare she? Come on, man.
I know her father was like the pale.
I mean, the level of non-self-awareness. It's like, come on.
I know, and that someone should rot in hell anyway is mean. Except John McCain, he deserves it. But but she was like saying this, and that whole thread, you had Randy Savage in there, and somebody upped that one and said not only was it savage, it was vicious. And it had Sid Vicious and Randy Savage. There's like at some point.
We just came full circle, ladies and gentlemen. That was a full-on professional wrestling reference from where we started from minute 1, 3 hours ago almost.
Sid Justice and Randy Savage. I love Randy Savage though, man. It's like we could do a whole podcast.
Ooh yeah. How fantastic is that? Well, I can't keep you any much longer, my man. Thank you so very much for your time. Obviously, you are more than welcome. He is the host of the ANC Report. You can find him on the links that I will provide here. Ryan Dawson. Patrick, any closing statements, my man?
I just want to make sure that I get a chance to talk to Ryan before we hang out.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
You can edit and clip the end of this off.
Well, no, I'm just signing off from our regular, tuning in audience. This has been freaking
off with the same phrase. Bolton must go.
There we go.
Yes, he must.
And like I said, I will provide all the all the stuff to get a hold of Ryan after the show. Not that you don't know who Ryan is, but we'll provide the stuff so you can get a hold of him. Thank you guys so much for tuning in for another episode of The Conspiracy Farm. On behalf of the Eater of Worlds, the Bringer of Thunder, Pat Militich, this is Jeffrey Wilson signing off. Peace. So much love. There will always be more. Holla.